The story begins deep inside a dark, damp cave. Loud screeches echoed off the walls as goblins celebrated the death of their chief. One goblin, clutching the former chief's weapon, declared himself the new leader. His eyes gleamed with a mix of triumph and madness as he brandished the stolen weapon, reveling in his newfound power. However, his partner had a different opinion. He believed that since he had done most of the work, he should be the chief. Fueled by jealousy and anger, he lunged at his partner and bit down hard on his nose. The cave filled with the sounds of their struggle, the screeches growing louder. Other goblins gathered around, watching the fight with glee and placing bets on who would win. To them, this was an exciting pastime. Their simple minds found great entertainment in the chaos of battle. Yet amidst the excitement, there is something more that thrilled them than a fight. As they had remembered, they still had a prey to satisfy their desires, and the previous chief had not yet laid hands on her, which made the goblins' eyes sparkled with anticipation. So they began murmuring amongst themselves, plotting to search for her and claim her for themselves. But the others hesitated. The goblin guarding the prey had returned, and he was different from the rest. Unlike the others, who wore simple cloths to cover their nether regions, this one was draped in ragged clothes that covered most of his body. His appearance was intimidating, not just because of his attire, but also because he stood out, covering himself like a human. Despite his intimidating presence, he was alone, with no chief to lead them. The goblins were simply following their base instincts and their desire craves for flesh. And so they eyed the strange goblin intently, trying to discern his next move, suspecting that he knew where the prey was located. So it is smart to follow him closely and seize the prey when the opportunity arose. But some of the goblins suggested waiting a bit longer, as a few of their toughest members had already gone ahead to find the prey. They planned to let the oddball discover the prey first and engage in a fight, then take advantage of the chaos to kill him and the big guys, ultimately claiming the prey for themselves. But they didn't take into account that the oddball was eavesdropping on their conversation. His ears perked up, and instead of idling around and walking slowly, the odd goblin decided to bolt toward where the girl was held. His sudden sprint allowed him to lose the goblins who were following him. But he encountered another problem upon arriving at the location. As he had feared, the goblins were all up in arms, ready to violate her. Noticing his presence, the girl pleaded for help, her eyes wide with fear. But the biggest goblin of the group stepped forward to confront the odd goblin, as he refused to let anyone stop him from having his good time, especially with the chief already dead. And as the strongest goblin in the group, he felt entitled to claim the prey first. But the odd goblin didn't care about any of that. He was determined to protect the girl he had been guarding. Seeing his resolve, the big goblin and his minions decided to attack him all at once. Outnumbered, the odd goblin was quickly overpowered by the ferocity of their assault. Despite the odds, he knew he couldn't let this be the end. Watching for an opening, he seized the moment and didn't waste any time. He killed the biggest goblin of the bunch. The others froze in shock, never expecting a goblin to wield a weapon as sharp and deadly as a human's. With this, fear immediately set in their minds. The sight of their leader felled so quickly and brutally made them realize they were outmatched. Panicked, the remaining goblins bolted from the place, but not without shouting threats. They promised to return with reinforcements to take him down. And now that the other goblins had fled, the odd goblin could finally catch his breath. He tried to collect himself, knowing that more battles were on the horizon. This was just the beginning of the hellish day that would soon unfold. As he took a moment to recover, the pink-haired woman named Kelia thanked him once more. This wasn't the first time he had saved her, nor would it be the last. She had come to realize that he was different from the other goblins, as he had never harmed her in any way. So she tries her best to be of help to him in any way she can. While it was true that a goblin would never protect a human, there was a deeper reason for his actions. The odd goblin was different because he had once been human too. A few days back, Lin Tian died in a gruesome accident. But he hadn't expected that instead of meeting God after being hit by a dump truck, he would be transported to another world with a system. Though he had a system, it still hadn't fully activated. Other than being able to see some stats, it didn't seem to have any other functions. Quite literally useless. Despite this, Lin Tian hadn't been idle these past few days. From what Kelia had told him, he had gained some understanding of this new world. This world, created by gods, was teeming with various powerful monsters. And humans had carved out their place on this continent through sheer strength. Unfortunately, the goblin he reincarnated as was the weakest and filthiest monster in this world. Under such circumstances, his stats were incredibly low. Even among goblins, he could be easily killed with an overall combat power of only 30. Luckily, his name hadn't changed. He was still Lin Tian, which provided a small comfort. But there was a way to get stronger in this place. And that was through mating with these girls. In this harsh reality, goblins had the ability to get stronger through constant mating and reproduction. However, they had no females of their own. So to reproduce, they could only mate with other female creatures. This was why goblins constantly plundered and abducted women. But Lin Tian had been human, and doing such things was completely against his beliefs. So that method of getting stronger was off the table. But with his beliefs, he found himself in a state of worry. As he was trying to think of other ways to increase his strength, he knew all too well that the other goblins would definitely return to attack them. But it seems like he was on a dead end. Noticing his worried expression, Kelia tried her best to lighten the mood. She assured him not to worry, saying that after spending these days together, she understood him better. She knew he was different from the other goblins, and didn't really want to live among them. With a hopeful smile, she promised that when the Night Order came to rescue her, she would tell them how he had saved her. And there is nothing to worry. As she believed that the Night Order is always fair and just, they will definitely agree to let him live in the village. And with her optimism and the stories she shared about the Holy Night Order gave Lin Tian hope. He believed her words, which sparked optimism in himself as well. And so he started thinking that even if the system couldn't activate immediately, as long as he held out until the humans came to rescue them and gained their protection, he could survive. Then he could slowly figure out how to fully activate his system. But things weren't going to be as easy as Lin Tian had hoped. As the screech of a goblin rushing towards them shattered the brief moment of peace. Without hesitation, he commanded Kelia to hide. She complied without question, disappearing into the shadows. Just as expected, a goblin appeared, but it seemed to be alone. Despite being alone, this goblin had the same desperate agenda. It rushed towards them with frantic energy, revealing that a human had appeared, killing the others. And since it believed that strength was the only way to avoid death, the goblin frantically ran to find Kelia to get strong. But its reckless charge made it an easy target for Lin Tian. He swiftly killed the goblin on the spot. With the immediate threat neutralized, he quickly relayed the information, telling Kelia that the humans are here to rescue her. Immediately, Kelia's face lit up with delight. He assumed that it must be the Holy Order. So without wasting a moment, she moved to find them, her heart filled with hope and excitement, while Lin Tian watched as she darted off, a mix of relief and apprehension filling him. The arrival of the Holy Order could mean salvation for Kelia, and possibly a chance for him to prove his worth. But their progress was abruptly halted as they felt a massive aura being released. The intensity of the power made the cave rumble. It turns out, it emanated from a human who was effortlessly dealing with the goblins with just one strike. But he doesn't have to go that hard in dealing with goblins. So this individual just seemed to be letting off steam. His fury evident as he dispatched the filthy creatures that had dared to tear his Holy Order uniform. Lin Tian stood there and watched in awe and disbelief. This level 25 warrior, named Louder, exuded an overwhelming presence. What shocked Lin Tian even more was when he used his appraisal skill on Louder, and discovered his overall combat power was 400. It was the highest stat Lin Tian had seen since arriving in this world, making him question if Louder was really human. While Lin Tian stood frozen in place, marveling at how effortlessly humans dealt with the goblins, Kelia excitedly approached Commander Louder, thrilled to finally see another human. But Lin Tian quickly noticed that Louder was raising his sword to strike Kelia. With quick reflexes, he managed to push her out of the way just in time. Though it was rough, he managed to save Kelia from the deadly blow. Still, the sudden attack left Lin Tian baffled. Weren't these holy knights supposed to rescue people? So he wondered why they were attacking Kelia. It dawned on him that perhaps the darkness of the cave had caused Louder to mistake her for a goblin. It seemed that was the case, as Louder angrily referred to them as goblins, and expressed his disdain that a goblin had managed to dodge his attack. With this, Kelia quickly tried to clear up the misunderstanding, explaining who she was. But Louder just told her to shut up, as he already knew it was her. But he believed that she had been defiled by goblins and might even be carrying a goblin's spawn. So it was ridiculous for someone as filthy as her to expect mercy from him. It would be better for her to go repent her sins to the Great Holy Mother. Immediately Kelia pleaded with him, insisting that although she had been captured, she hadn't been defiled by the goblins. She then pointed at Lin Tian, explaining that he had protected her. But unfortunately, Louder was a close-minded person. He didn't believe anything she said. And the idea that a goblin had saved her and was not hostile towards humans was beyond his comprehension. He even felt insulted, thinking Kelia was taking him for a fool. So he raised his sword to strike once more and just advised her to make her stories more believable if she was going to lie. And Lin Tian couldn't believe what he was witnessing. He hadn't expected things to go south so quickly. With no other choice, he stepped in without hesitation, shoving Kelia to the side and confronting Louder himself. He hoped to buy enough time for Kelia to escape. Unexpectedly, before Louder's sword could reach him, a magical glow appeared out of thin air, protecting Lin Tian from the attack. This powerful magic came from a woman draped in white, her aura exuding holiness and commanding authority. She wore a veil, and her presence immediately halted Louder as she asked him to wait. Expressing her interest in this strange goblin, Commander Louder stepped aside, revealing that this woman was none other than the Holy Maiden, Freya. Seizing the opportunity, Kelia crawled over and called out to the Holy Maiden, begging her to save them. Freya helped Kelia up and handed her over to the very man who had been trying to kill her moments ago. Then she turned her attention to Lin Tian and asked if he could understand her words. Lin Tian was struck by the gravity of the situation. He realized that Freya, the Holy Maiden and spokesperson of the temple, might be his only hope of leaving this place alive. So he snapped out of his shock and quickly responded that he can understand her. He took a deep breath and continued to reveal that he is not a monster of this world, as he used to be human. But he became like this because of an accident, but he can explain everything if she takes him with her. Freya's eyes narrowed slightly, as this was such an unexpected event. Goblins were usually stupid and lowly creatures. They couldn't speak or think fluently. Yet, this goblin could talk. Although he blabbers about stories they don't understand, it does seem smarter than those goblins. This rarity made them wonder if he might be a gift from the Holy Mother. And so the Holy Maiden Freya turned to Kelia and asked for confirmation if this goblin really did not hurt her. To which Kelia gladly confirmed, and not only did he not hurt her, but he also protected her from other goblins and gave her food. This was enough of a confirmation for Freya, and as she recognized the goblin's uniqueness, she decided to take the goblin back first and study it thoroughly before making any decisions. Which delighted Kelia as she had fulfilled her promise to the goblin. Freya then turned toward Lin Tian and asked if he was willing to join them. And knowing that staying meant certain death, he immediately answered that he is willing. And with a flick of her fingers, Freya quickly broke the barrier that held Lin Tian. Then she ordered everyone to prepare to leave. Finally, things seemed to be looking up for Lin Tian, as he was now with a person who could listen to reason. And he felt a sense of security about his future, which he was grateful for. So he immediately approached Freya to express his thanks, promising that he would repay her properly. But as he looked more closely at her complexion, he noticed a wicked smile that caught him off guard. And the next thing he heard was a sound he was all too familiar with. The sickening noise of metal piercing flesh. Instantly, he knew what had happened but was still in denial. When he turned around, his worst fears were confirmed. Kelia had been killed without a second thought, her once lively body now lying lifeless and cold on the ground. Lin Tian was stunned, unable to move. The shock was too overwhelming. Just when he thought things were getting better, it turned out to be a cruel lie. He stood there, frozen, trying to convince himself that this was a nightmare, a cruel trick of his mind. But the voice of the woman, who he had thought was their holy savior, shattered any remaining hope. Her wicked laughter echoed in the cave as she mocked the goblin, telling him that when they get back, he better repay her well, revealing her true nature to be a sadistic monster who took pleasure in his helpless reaction. And Lin Tian was indeed helpless, shaken to his core as his fragile reality crumbled before his eyes. And 1 week had passed. In the middle of the village, the bell rang loudly, summoning everyone to gather. The villagers knew that the influential people from the temple had something important to announce. As they assembled, tension filled the air, and a sense of anticipation gripped the crowd. An official from the temple stepped forward and addressed the villagers, rallying them with alarming news that this goblin raid has brought great harm to Brighttown. The goblins used despicable sneak attacks to slaughter 30 residents of their village. And this intensified the villagers' emotions, their grief and anger palpable. But it was a reasonable reaction, given the loss of so many lives to these foul creatures. But what wasn't natural was the way the temple was using these emotions to further their own agenda. And the official continued, praising the temple's actions. For the Holy Order on behalf of the temple had purged these goblins and avenged the harmed villagers. After that, the holy maiden, Ephraia, stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. She spoke with a calm yet authoritative voice, telling everyone to continue to pray devoutly to the temple. For the temple will always protect her devout followers. And her words instantly convinced everyone in the village. Even those who had been skeptical before now found themselves praising the holy temple. The villagers' faith was reignited and they looked to the temple with newfound devotion and trust. A few moments later, the holy maiden Ephraia returned to her quarters, celebrating the success of the sermon. Not that it was a surprise, as these villagers were as foolish as ever. Now they would pray even more devoutly to the temple and offer more tributes. Her celebration was abruptly interrupted by someone calling her out, turning towards the voice. It was the same goblin from before. Lin Tian had just regained consciousness, and it looked like he had gone through hell. Gruesome scars covered his body, and one of his eyes had been gouged out. Despite his injuries, there was a fierce rage in his eyes as he called Ephraia a bitch over and over again. But Ephraia paid no mind to his words. Instead, a twisted smile played on her lips as she marveled at how resilient he was. With such strong vitality, it was no wonder the temple can't eradicate goblins from the continent. But now that Lin Tian had regained consciousness, Ephraia was excited to see how poison would affect goblins this time. This made Lin Tian grit his teeth. It was the same thing over and over. This wasn't for research. It was just her wicked way to satisfy her sadistic nature. With built-up anger, he couldn't control himself and lashed out at Ephraia once more, accusing her of deceiving him, deceiving everyone, and killing Kelia. He then questioned if this was truly the holy order that Ephraia was so proud of. If this was her idea of human justice. Because if it was, then they were no different from the goblins they despised. But his defiance was swiftly met with brutality. Ephraia silenced him by forcefully plunging a stick into his mouth. And now that he was silenced, she sneered, questioning how a weak and trashy creature like him, a lustful goblin, could dare to question human justice. And that Kelia was bewitched by him and dared to speak for him. That's a betrayal of humanity and the Holy Order. So her death was her final loyalty. And goblins are nothing more than vermin on this continent. And for the Holy Maiden to speak to him is a great favor. So he should be grateful and use his small, disgusting body to contribute to human and Holy Order experiments. And with that, the torture continued. He helplessly endured it all, the agony relentless and unending. Even when he slipped into unconsciousness, he was swiftly awakened by the next wave of pain. Through the torment, Lin Tian questioned if he was really going to die here. So unwilling and helpless, but there was no one he could blame but himself. It was all his fault. He had been too foolish. Reincarnated from a human to a low-level goblin, he had naively held onto human compassion, thinking they were righteous and kind. Weakness and naivety were his deadliest mistakes. After being taken back to the human village, Louder and Ephraia had tortured and toyed with him in every possible way. Never believing a word he said, they took sadistic pleasure in his suffering. He didn't last long, eventually being toyed to death by a sadistic woman. The only wish that held him to his grave was that if he could do it again, he would never trust humans. If he could do it again, he would grind their bones and drain their blood. But that was only if he could live again. As his consciousness faded, rather than drifting into an endless void, Lin Tian woke up in a different place. A place where stars could be seen for miles. This was impossible, so he checked his body and saw that it was intact, void of any damage. Yet something felt different. He felt caught between death and life, making him wonder where this place was. But he didn't have to wait long for answers, as a system window popped up in front of his very eyes, notifying him that the Goblin life simulation system has been activated. Then it reported that he was actually dead and gave him a recap of his life, and that the pain of the week's torture was imprinted on his soul. He would never forget the pain humans brought him. His end had been one of the worst fates for any transmigrator, and therefore the system can allow him to restart and open a new life. This was a shock to him, as the personal system, which had been useless from the start, had activated only after his death. And if his understanding was correct, this system could bring him back to life. But it seemed he would be reborn once again as the lowest creature, a goblin. And Lin Tian's mind raced. The idea of returning as a goblin, the weakest and most despised of creatures, filled him with dread. But just to make sure, Lin Tian asked the system about what the yes and no options represent. And the system promptly reported to him that if he chooses no, His soul will dissipate and die completely. And if he chooses yes, he will retain his current memory and system and be sent back to the Goblin Cave a week ago. And the thought of retaining his memory and going back a week had the most impact on him, instantly bringing a smile to his face. This was a chance for revenge. He will make Louder and Afreya pay for what they had done to him and Kelia. So without a moment's hesitation, he chose the yes option with a determined smile on his face. And as soon as he made his choice, a surge of life force began to transfer into him, initiating the Goblin Life 2.0, but this time there was a different glint in his eye. The eyes of a being with nothing but revenge driving him. And just when he thought things couldn't get better, the system added an additional surprise. Because this is now Goblin Life 2.0, it was inclined to help him survive a bit longer, so the system has slightly strengthened him. Which made him smirk. As it was indeed just a little bit, but he wouldn't complain, as it was better than nothing, and with that, he was back in his previous body. But before he could start moving, the system popped up once more, warning him that although he had been reborn, the danger was not over. The human holy order was about to reach him. And if he died again, the system would not be able to revive him. But this didn't shock him, as it was to be expected. Reincarnating once was already a miracle. Now he was on high alert. With the order about to arrive, he couldn't afford to let his guard down. He immediately asked the system what could do, prompting it to explain that it was called the Goblin Life Simulation System. The host could simulate his life with the system to foresee future events. Every choice he made would lead to different outcomes, and each simulation required 24 hours after it ended. He would earn points from each simulation, which could be exchanged for items. This made him grin, as he realized that it meant he could see the future. Such an overpowered system indeed, and it would be a crime not to use it to its full potential. So, he immediately started the life simulation. The system prompted, displaying the current scenario. Escape the Goblin Cave. The Goblin Cave he was in had been discovered by the Holy Knight Loader. To escape from Holy Knight Loader, he needed to make a critical choice. First option was to warn his fellow goblins and unite to face Louder and his men with a reward of 10 points. Or abandon the other goblins and escape with a reward of 5 points. Or hide in the cave and pray Louder and his men don't find him, which would give him 0 points. Although there were 3 options, he was sure that even if all the goblins in the cave united, they couldn't match Louder alone. Only escaping could save him. With this realization, he decided to simulate it first and choose the option with the highest score. Knowing that if he could exchange for a weapon, his chance of defeating his enemies with a sneak attack rises. Just as he expected, relying on the goblins here was impossible for survival. Even when he led the goblins in a desperate battle against Holy Knight Louder, the vast difference in strength meant they were still slain by Louder and his men. However, he earned the points he needed. So he immediately opened the exchange shop. To his surprise, there were so many weapons to choose from, ranging from short blades to long swords, and every weapon he could think of. There was even an option to buy a gun. And it looks powerful. But alas, his points were too low. Thankfully, there was still a weapon that cost exactly 10 points. It was an elven lightweight swift blade. This small dagger crafted by elves gave the user a 10% speed boost and 15 strength increase. Though fragile, it was incredibly sharp. Without hesitation, he bought it. As soon as the blade materialized in his hand, he felt his stats significantly boosted. It was worlds apart from the typical goblin weapons. He was sure that if he hit a vital spot with it, it could be a one-hit kill. But that was enough of daydreaming for today. As he realized that he hadn't seen Kelia anywhere, so he asked the system where she had gone. The system answered that due to the host's rebirth, some timeline details had changed. In this timeline, Kelia was not captured by goblins and continued to live happily in the village. This was a surprise, but a welcome one, as it looked like he had fulfilled his promise to Kelia after all. And he was thankful for the unexpected turn of events. And in that case, he had no more concerns. With his mind now clear, he focused on what lay ahead. Revenge. But first, he had to escape and survive. He immediately headed towards the exit. He knew the narrowest passage would be his best bet. The entrance outside was smaller, meaning the guards would be relatively weaker. With this in mind, he moved swiftly and silently. And Lin Tian made his way through the cave. His senses were heightened. And just as he expected, as Lin Tian got close to the exit, he could already hear someone outside. From their attire, it seemed like they were knights of the Holy Order. And quickly he hid in the shadows and eavesdropped to gather more information. Thankfully, with nothing to do, the knights easily got bored and started chatting. And just as Lin Tian had thought, this knight expected that any goblin that runs out from this small entrance is trash. And so they believed that they can crush it with one hammer. But hunting goblins wasn't their only priority. Because as Lord Louder ordered, any girl who tries to escape in the chaos must be killed. And they definitely can't let this reach the village. So they would also dispose the body instantly and kill any witness. This chatter cemented Lin Tian's belief that everyone in that damned holy order was rotten. For their rule, they even killed innocent people of their own kind. Let alone a goblin like him. He had no choice but to fight. With this resolve, he pinched his nose and tried his best to mimic a woman's voice in distress, calling for help. This instantly lured in one of the knights, who was thinking of the reward Lord Louder would give for killing a straggler. He approached the cave entrance with a two-faced smile. As he got close, the knight then called out, reassuring the supposed woman not to be afraid, and claimed he was there to take her back. But instead of finding a woman, the knight was met with a dagger plunging deep into his brain, killing him instantly. With this, Lin Tian made his first kill. One of the remaining hunters noticed his buddy wasn't moving, wondering why it was taking so long for him to return. Maybe he was bugging out, so he decided to approach and check. But as he got close, Lin Tian suddenly appeared from the shadows and the man tried to ready himself for a fight but was too caught off guard. And therefore Lin Tian easily pushed his weak ass and Lin Tian was on demon time right now. Even when the guy was mid-fall, he was already up there ready to slit this bitch to the afterlife. But the man's armor saved him from a fatal blow. Nonetheless, his armor couldn't compensate his lack of skill. And so he just hit the ground hard and lay there, sweating bullets as he realized he was face to face with death. But since this boy was desperate, he began begging for his life while kneeling in front of another guy, crying his eyes out and show pictures of his family, thinking that since this goblin could speak human language, he might have human empathy while Lin Tian was standing over him. Finding the man's actions pitiful, just because he understood human language didn't mean he had human empathy, especially after he'd killed the man's buddy without blinking. Still, he let this boy talk as he was curious where this would go. And so the guy continued to plead, explaining that he was just following orders, forced even. He never wanted to go to this place to begin with. To show his sincerity, he told the goblin he would reach into his pack and offer him his gold coins. And if that wasn't enough, he promised to bring fresh, juicy human girls after this. But this just angered Lin Tian even more. And he now regretted letting the man talk for so long, as the offer of trafficking humans disgusted him, especially knowing the man had his own daughter. And so, as soon as the guy tried to show him the London special technique, he didn't hesitate to demonstrate his own form of ruthless justice, separating the man's head from his body. And with his head roll on the floor and pendant on the ground, he felt sorry for the man's family, but understood that sometimes weeds need to be pulled out before they can spread. Some evils are best eradicated swiftly and thoroughly. But his attention was then diverted by a voice coming from the forest. It was unmistakably Loder's. And they were checking up on the guards. Without further delay, Lin Tian undressed the guard, donned his clothes and slipped away, vowing to see Loder and Ephria soon. A few moments later, Loder and Ephria arrived at the scene, confused about what had happened to their station guards. The cut was clean and swift. This couldn't have been the work of a normal goblin. Ephria suggested that a goblin capable of killing both guards must be a mutant, and letting it escape was not a good sign. Which pissed Loder off even more, as he kicked one of the corpses in frustration, furious that these guards couldn't handle a mutated goblin. While Ephria, on the other hand, licked her lips, her sadistic excitement barely contained, as the thought of getting her hands on such a unique specimen for her experiments thrilled her to no end. A few moments later, nightfall arrived. The moon illuminated the forest, casting an eerie glow while we see Lin Tian gasping for air as he was relieved to have survived. He had been running endlessly until he was exhausted. But he couldn't afford to let his guard down now. So he tries to recover as quickly as possible to continue his journey. As he ate, though, his thoughts turned to the Holy Knights, and since they hated goblins so much, he resolved to deal with them in the same brutal manner goblins did. Goblins could upgrade their characteristics through mating and devouring, improving their own values and cultivating stronger future generations. Lin Tian's mind was filled with vengeance. And in this life, he wanted every man to live with his only extravagant wish being death. Let every woman moan and wail under his feet, especially that damned Loder and Ephria. But his train of thought was quickly shattered as he noticed the rustling of the bushes and with him on edge. He immediately assumed it was one of Loder's minions still hunting him. So without hesitation, he stood up and rushed in for a surprise attack, startling the figure in the bush. With this, the other party tripped over a stone, which fortunately made it easy for Lin Tian to see who she was, and she was a goblin and a talking one. But with his momentum already in check, he couldn't do anything but stumble with her, landing awkwardly on top. And the next thing he saw was a clear view of her and her voluptuous body, an unexpected sight for him. But he didn't care about that, as his mind was filled with questions. Wondering why on earth was there a female goblin appearing now? As he had always understood that goblins were only male, reproducing by mating with other creatures. But her presence challenged that belief. But with his eyes darting around in confusion, the female goblin assumed he was about to do something bad. And so she quickly sat up and begged him not to hurt her, explaining that she was just fetching water. But this made him think even more. Wondering, how could this goblin speak in complete sentences just like him? To find answers, he opted to use his appraisal skill on her. While her level is nothing to knot with, her general information revealed surprising titles such as a fallen god, pure soul, and God's blessing. But what shocked him even more was a hidden characteristic, stating that if a male goblin united with her, he would become the legendary goblin god. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. This female goblin held immense power and potential, something he never imagined could exist. And now that she was here, trembling before him, unaware of the extraordinary destiny she carried, as he could immediately ascend to godhood if he could mate with her. But that is only if he could mate with her. But with his growing intent look, it only made the goblin girl more uncomfortable, leading her to assume he didn't believe her story. So she shakily tried to convince him again that she was truly called by the goblin leader to fetch water. If she couldn't do that, she would be beaten to death by the clan leader. And her expression said it all, so he immediately apologized, explaining that it wasn't his intention to scare her. To show his sincerity, he patted her back and, with a calm voice, reassured her that it was fine. But he wasn't entirely doing this out of compassion. He just didn't want her to cry anymore, as it might attract Loader's minions. But this surprised the girl as she realized he could talk as well. Her eyes gleamed with excitement, which made Lin Tian laugh at how cute she was. But this was reasonable, as goblins generally couldn't speak. And she probably rarely talked to other tribesmen. Finding someone like him must have felt like a godsend to her. However, his train of thought was disrupted once more as he noticed the goblin girl clinging to his cloak. She did this because she felt safe with him, as this was the first time she had encountered such a kind goblin. Other goblins would only beat and scold her. It was the first time someone was taking care of her so carefully. With this, she suggested that if he had nowhere to go, he could come back with her instead. This surprised Lin Tian, and her words meant he was almost near the first base to becoming a goblin god. Immediately, he expressed his interest in joining her, even though he wasn't sure if Loader and the others had caught up. Getting with her was the top priority. But mating here wasn't an option either, as he couldn't risk Loader's men finding him with his pants down, balls deep inside a goblin. So he set his priority to find a place to stay first, which was what the goblin girl had suggested. Meanwhile, the goblin girl, on the other hand, was blushing as she noticed how strong his arm felt pressing down on her shoulder. And so she immediately looked at Lin Tian and agreed to take him to her village. With this, his eyes lit up and a grin dawned upon him. It was like killing two birds with one stone, as he wouldn't have to worry about where to recruit his subordinates anymore while also becoming the goblin god in the process. Not long after, they arrived at the goblin camp. And as expected, the new face put everyone on high alert. And not only was he new, but he was also wearing clothes like humans do, which the goblins had never seen before, and therefore think that he was a freak show, making them even more on edge. But despite the threat, Lin Tian could only think about how impressive the numbers of goblins in this tribe were, which convinced him even more that this was the best place to start expanding his power. And so, with a composed demeanor, he explained to the goblins that he wanted to meet their boss as he was here to join them. But this just agitated them, because to them, an outsider thinking he could see the boss whenever he wanted was disrespectful. So instead of complying, they were now thinking of killing him and sending him to see the boss right after that. But the girl couldn't allow such a thing to happen, so she immediately got between them, trying to convince them not to do anything to him, assuring them he wasn't a bad goblin at all. But the commotion garnered the boss's attention, which surprised Lin Tian after seeing him, as the boss carried a staff adorned with human bones, and his appearance was entirely different from the goblins Lin Tian had seen before, different from the previous goblin chief he had been under. Not only that, his level was not to be trifled with either, as it matched that of Loader, and his title was somewhat concerning as he got that breeding machine title coupled with a divine blessing. And he also had an overall battle power of 200, which made Lin Tian more alert. But he couldn't back down now, so he pressed on with his plan, determined to make this village his own. The goblin leader, after appearing, slowly walked towards Lamphine. He looked at the female goblin, asking if she had brought the stranger back to the camp. The girl filled with worry, confirmed that she had brought Lamthine to the camp, explaining that he had nowhere else to go. With his terrifying red eyes, the leader praised the girl for doing a good job. But then, to her surprise, he ordered other goblins to grab Lamthine, intending to kill and eat him. The goblins, excited at the prospect of a meal, jumped up in glee. They pushed the girl aside and pointed their weapons at Lamthine. Lamthine immediately pulled out his weapon, commanding them to stop. He claimed to have the ability to create weapons and that joining their tribe would make them stronger. The iron knife in his hand immediately caught the leader's attention. He quickly ordered the other goblins to stop and rushed towards Lamthine. He brought his nose close to Lamthine's face, claiming that he smelled deception on him. However, he also wanted to know what kind of weapons Lamthine could create. Using his knowledge of modern technology, Lamthine explained that he could make weapons out of iron, provided they could find iron ore. He promised that with enough time, he could create weapons more powerful than the knife. He thought to himself, this goblin shaman could speak very clearly. It seemed the higher the level of the goblin, the more intelligent they were. Seeing the leader's hesitation, Lamthine emphasized that with iron weapons, the tribe would have a chance to win against humans or other monsters. The goblins began to discuss, acknowledging that possessing iron weapons would be incredibly beneficial. They felt that goblins, compared to humans, were weak creatures but with iron weapons, they could move north to snatch girls for mating. Faced with the immense benefits of iron weapons, the leader agreed to give Lamthine a chance. He demanded that Lamthine find iron ore and create weapons within 3 days, or he would be eaten. Not only him, but the female goblin would be eaten too. Hearing this, the girl became extremely worried. After giving his demands, the leader and the goblin horde left. Comforting the girl, Lamthine looked towards the leader with a hint of anger. He silently judged the leader as a cruel person, willing to kill even members of his own tribe when enraged. Lamthine suppressed his anger, knowing that he couldn't defeat the leader with his current strength. He needed to use this time to create weapons and become stronger. The next day, at dawn, Lamthine led the goblins in the tribe to search for iron ore. It was now night, and the moonlight made the forest seem frightening. The female goblin was also with them. She was incredibly exhausted, stating that she couldn't walk anymore. She had been walking all day and was utterly drained. She didn't receive any help from her own kind. Instead, they beat her, calling her ugly and threatening to kill her if she didn't find the iron ore. She kept pleading, but the abuse didn't stop. They wanted to kill her right then and therefore being lazy. Unable to bear the sight, Lamthine picked up a rock and threw it at the head of one of the goblins. Lamthine explained that he wanted them to follow and help find the iron ore, not to fight. He said he would tell them what iron ore looks like and that if they wanted to live in return, they should go to the valley ahead and bring back some iron ore. If they didn't listen, he would kill them right then and there. Lamthine took out his knife and glared at the 3 goblins with a terrifying expression. This threat terrified them, as they imagined him killing them with the iron weapon. They rushed off to find iron ore, not forgetting to threaten Lamthine with death if he failed to create weapons. Lamthine thought to himself that sooner or later they would kill him after obtaining iron tools. The task at hand was to become stronger. Looking at Gobu's information, the notification about mating with her to become a goblin god caught his eye. Lamthine decided it was time to do the things adults do. Seeing Gobu crying, Lamthine told her to stop. He sat down beside Gobu and asked her if she wanted to follow him. He promised to protect her, feed her, give her a warm home, and ensure no one would bully her. The girl was confused at these words, asking if he was telling the truth. Looking at the girl sincerely, Lamp then affirmed that everything he said was true. However, he was currently too weak. To prevent further bullying, he needed to become stronger, and Gobu was the only one who could help him. The girl, confused, asked what she could do to help him become stronger. Lamthine felt a little embarrassed, but he said that if they mated, he would become stronger. This made the girl's face turn red. The girl looked at Lamthine with suspicion, asking if he was telling the truth. She said she had never tried this before. Lamthine was also a little flustered about bringing up this topic. He reassured her that everything would be fine, and that he would help her if she wanted it. Without waiting for her response, Lamthine gently kissed her soft lips and then laid her down on the ground. The girl, embarrassed, agreed, saying she would bear his children. Then, shy sounds echoed through the air. At the same time, notifications appeared one after another, informing him that mating had raised his current level to level 7. And the sound of upgrading echoed. The increase in level also increased his attributes. After a while, Lamthine's body began to change, his muscles becoming more defined. He was now level 7, with 40 hydrogen phosphide, 10 strength, 6 defense, and a total strength of 65. Lamthine was surprised at the change in his body. He thought that if he continued like this, he could defeat the goblin leader. Lamthine warmly stroked Gobu's head. He told her that she was his wife now, and he would protect her forever. The girl blushed and, exhausted, thanked Lanthine, calling him a good person. At this moment, a cry for help caught their attention. Looking in that direction, they saw a goblin running towards them in fear, followed by a large wolf. What caught Lanthine's attention was the iron ore in the goblin's hand. He didn't expect to find iron ore here. But before he could get it, he had to deal with this problem first. Lanthine immediately grabbed his knife. He asked Gobu to wait there for him. Gobu looked at Lanthine with trust, reminding him to be careful. For Lanthine, this wolf was a test of his strength. The wolf was about to catch the unfortunate goblin, who was desperately trying to escape. But Lanthine suddenly appeared, wielding his sharp iron knife. Charging directly at the large wolf, the fleeing goblin was completely taken aback by this action. Then, it was filled with fear when it saw Lanthine kill the wolf with one blow. In the goblin's eyes, Lanthine had become a terrifying figure. When Lanthine asked it to give him the iron ore, it immediately handed it over, overwhelmed with fear. Holding the iron ore in his hand, Lanthine laughed with delight at the high quality of the ore. Now, they needed more of this, and after they returned, he would make weapons for the goblins and the tribe. 2 days passed, and with the help of other goblins, Lanthine was able to successfully create a spear with an iron blade. Although it wasn't pretty, it was a major accomplishment for Lanthine and the goblins. The goblins couldn't believe Lanthine could actually create a weapon out of iron, but they wondered if it would actually work. To prove the effectiveness of the new weapon, Lanthine easily plunged the spearhead into the tough skull of the number 1 crocodile wolf. As expected, the spearhead easily pierced through. This demonstration astonished the other goblins. The goblin Lanthine had saved before was incredibly excited. Pointing at the crocodile wolf's corpse, he said he had seen Lanthine kill the wolf in just a few seconds using the iron weapon, and that he really could make weapons. The other goblins agreed that the iron spear was much more powerful than the stone spears. While the goblins were discussing, Lanthine held the spear high and asked them if they wanted weapons like this, without hesitation. The other goblins shouted excitedly that they wanted one, and they hailed him as a god. Only one of the goblins present was not happy. The goblin leader was angry that a newcomer had stolen his respect. The leader grabbed attention by slamming the skull-headed staff in his hand onto the ground. With menacing red eyes, he admitted that Lanthine wasn't lying. Creating a weapon out of iron was a miracle. But it wasn't enough for Lanthine to stay in the tribe. While Lanthine and the other goblins listened, the leader demanded that Lanthine create 50 iron spears within 2 days. After making his demand, the leader immediately left. The other goblins didn't agree with this condition, but they didn't dare object. They felt the leader was too cruel, and they decided to help Lanthine complete the task. Lanthine wasn't surprised by the condition. He laughed confidently. He felt it was very advantageous that he had now earned the respect of the other goblins. This was a good step forward in his plan. On the day of the delivery, Lanthine had completed 50 iron spears. The goblins in the tribe were also very happy that Lanthine could stay in the tribe. With the same menacing look and cunning smile, the leader said he was very satisfied that Lanthine had completed the task and could now stay. To celebrate Lanthine joining the tribe, leader decided to hold a feast and demanded that everyone participate. The goblins immediately started dancing and celebrating. The feast quickly took place around a bonfire. Gobu cut out a piece of pork and brought it to Lanthine. This was the best part, so she wanted him to eat it. Lanthine happily accepted, but after eating for a while, a sharp pain hit him. Lanthine fell to the ground in agony, and Gobu was terrified. It was clear that Lanthine had been poisoned. The poisoner was none other than the leader. He walked up to Lanthine with an evil smile. He told Lanthine he was too stupid. The leader said he knew Lanthine's true intentions, and those who dared challenge his authority had only one place to go: hell. Before Lanthine could speak, the leader grabbed Gobu's hair and pulled her towards him. The leader said he saw that Lanthine cared about her very much, so now he would let Lanthine experience the pain of watching her die in front of him. A red line of blood appeared on Gobu's neck as the leader's claws stabbed into her. The leader wanted to crush Lanthine's arrogance and make him suffer. In Gobu's terrified eyes, a red stream of blood spurted out. But it wasn't Gobu's blood, it was the leader's. As his arm was cut off, Lanthine had done it. The leader fearfully asked why he could move after being poisoned. Lanthine smiled. He said the leader was an idiot. When facing a villain like him, he was always vigilant, and he was just pretending, but actually, Lanthine knew he was going to be poisoned because the system had warned him. The leader was now incredibly angry. He had no choice but to fight. He had lost an arm, so his fighting power had decreased. He used the bone chain in his hand to attack Lanthine. Lanthine also quickly attacked. With his speed, Lanthine easily dodged the attack. Lanthine jumped and his iron knife aimed at the leader's head. The leader was killed. The goblins saw that their leader was dead and were terrified. Lanthine looked at them and declared that he would be their new leader. He would lead them to become a powerful goblin tribe, and they would always have meat to eat. Lanthine hugged Gobu and raised his knife high. He declared his supremacy over the tribe. With Lanthine's strength, the other goblins readily agreed to him being their leader. After all, they were simple-minded creatures who only cared about meat and mating. And the reward Lanthine gave for their loyalty was the leader's corpse. Given permission, they immediately revealed their vicious nature. They devoured the corpse in a cruel and savage way, making Lanthine feel disgusted, but this was the reality of life. What mattered to him now was building his tribe, nurturing the next generation of goblins to make the tribe stronger. This was just the first step on his revenge. Amidst the chaos, no one noticed one pair of eyes watching everything from afar. It was a golden-haired elf girl. As she witnessed the scene, she wondered what was happening. Under the hazy moonlight of the strange world, amidst the ominous shadows of the trees, strange-looking houses appeared. A figure moved with incredible speed, taking just a few leaps to enter a brightly lit house. But what was truly striking was the horrifying scene below. Countless withered, blue goblin corpses hung from large bones. If Lin Tian had witnessed this, he would have been terrified. The elf girl stopped in front of a house. This was the one who had secretly watched Lin Tian's tribe. The princess of this elf tribe, Kasana. A guard elf saw her and was overjoyed to see her return. Ignoring the guard, Kasana immediately went inside. The guard was worried, wanting her to stop, as if there was something inside she shouldn't see. But Kasana didn't care. She said she had important news for her mother. Pushing the door open, Kasana rushed in and shouted, "There's strange activity in the goblin tribe in the eastern forest." But the scene inside left her utterly bewildered. Elves are known as a noble race with brave warriors, yet here was a promiscuous elf. Her full breasts on display and a revealing outfit, enjoying special attention from two men. Kasana blushed, stammering apologies and saying she had something to do. Before she could turn away, the queen's voice rang out. She demanded Kasana stop and asked what urgent matter brought her there so hastily. Kasana's eyes turned serious, and she once again mentioned the goblin tribe in the forest. The queen didn't seem interested. She considered goblins low-level, weak, and filthy creatures. Kasana quickly explained, "I found the remains of a bear in the demon forest. Completely chewed up, there are signs of a struggle. Many goblin footprints on the ground. The bear was likely killed by goblins from the demon forest. That giant bear is practically the strongest creature in the forest. Those goblins shouldn't be able to kill it." Her voice grew anxious. "A few days ago, I saw the goblin leader killed by a young goblin. I'm worried the bear's death is connected to that goblin." The queen was slightly surprised to hear about the new leader, but didn't seem overly concerned. What interested her was the growing number of goblins. The queen snapped her fingers, asking the man to continue serving her. She ordered Kasana to lead a group to eliminate the goblins, but told her not to kill them all, leave a few alive. This wasn't out of kindness. The queen wanted to harvest the hearts of living goblins to brew a tonic for the elf men in her tribe. Of course, Kasana knew the effects of this potion. Hearing this, the queen offered her a man for the night. She even asked if Kasana had any special requests. Kasana was startled. This reward embarrassed her. She said she had to check on some things tonight and quickly bid farewell to her mother. Back at Lin Tian's camp, the goblins were in a discussion. On the ground was a map of the elf tribe, painstakingly investigated by Lin Tian's subordinates. The tribe consisted of 30 houses, all situated high up. Lin Tian praised his subordinate, promising him 2 elf girls as a reward after defeating the tribe. He told everyone to prepare iron weapons. Hearing about the reward of 2 elf girls, the goblin was excited and eager, immediately going to tell everyone to prepare their weapons. Lin Tian's expression wasn't joyful at the prospect of attacking another tribe. This was a world where strength determined survival. If he didn't build his tribe into a force, sooner or later, they would be destroyed. Lin Tian carefully analyzed the situation. There were 30 houses in the village. If each housed 2 elves, there would be a total of 60 elves. Adding the 10 elves guarding the mine, the tribe would have at least 70 people. Looking back, since their leader's death, Lin Tian had led the goblins in crafting weapons and hunting monsters, leveling up their abilities. The goblins, under Lin Tian's command, swept through the forest like a tidal wave, slaughtering countless monsters. These monsters, of course, were eaten. By devouring them, all goblins received new skills such as 15 points to their defense, skills that hardened their skin like stone. Other skills included silent movement and venom production. Not all goblins gained skills from eating monsters, but the tribe's overall strength had improved. Some standout goblins had reached level 18. With high stats, combined with simple iron spears and armor, they had a total strength of 250. The average strength of goblins in the tribe was now 200. But the elf tribe's collective strength was still significantly higher. This made Lin Tian a little worried. This was a dangerous battle, and Lin Tian wanted to prepare thoroughly. He decided to use the simulation system to find an effective attack method. The simulation began. You led a large goblin army to attack the elf tribe, confident in your victory. But you were ambushed by the elves. The goblins fell into a trap and were shot down. You were captured by the elf leader and hung in the demon forest, a warning to other goblins. Simulation results: you thought it was perfect, but in reality, it was under someone else's control. Score: 0, no reward. After the simulation ended, Lin Tian focused on the phrase "under someone else's control." At first, he didn't understand, but he quickly realized there was only one possibility for this result. His tribe was being watched by the elves. He quickly closed his eyes and focused. Goblins have excellent hearing and smell, so with a little concentration, he could sense any anomalies. Strange sounds quickly entered his perception. Looking into the distance, he discovered unusual signs. Meanwhile, the elves were rushing back to their tribe. Leading the way was Kasana. She couldn't believe that the goblin tribe would attack hers. Initially, she brought a group to eliminate them, but arriving at the camp, she discovered the goblins had changed drastically, especially after hearing about Lin Tian's plans. She wanted to return and report to her mother, but it seemed too late. She was discovered, and arrows flew towards the elves. Now, Kasana lay injured on the ground. Terrified around her were the bodies of other elves. In the distance, Lin Tian and the other goblins were approaching with sinister smiles. They were delighted to find a live elf. Kasana tried to flee, but she couldn't get up. The wound felt strange, as if the arrow had been poisoned. Lin Tian spoke, surprised at how easily he'd captured Kasana. He said she had arrived at the perfect time. Lin Tian coldly ordered his subordinates to capture all the elves. Kasana was awakened by an unknown liquid, her soaked form revealing stunningly beautiful lines, her dazed eyes evoking thoughts of wicked deeds. The goblins stared at her with lustful gazes, their desire for her undeniable. Waiting for the opportune moment, Lanthan grabbed Kasana, acknowledging the undeniable allure of the elf's body, sending the goblins into a frenzy. Capturing her would grant them a chance to defeat the elf queen. Gazed upon his prey, Kasana trembled. She attempted to intimidate Lanthan, calling him a coward. She declared herself the princess of the elves, questioning why he dared kidnap her and threaten her people. She claimed her mother's kindness had allowed Lanthan and his goblins to survive, for they would have been eradicated long ago. She warned him that if he dared touch her, the goblin queen would annihilate all goblins here. Lanthan only sneered at her threats. He flung Kasana to the ground, mocking her claims about the elf queen's kindness. The surrounding goblins echoed his laughter. He pointed to a goblin, stating that what he had heard from his subordinate contradicted Kasana's narrative. He said his subordinates might be foolish, but they never lied. In Kasana's terrified gaze, Lamphine revealed he knew her true purpose: to annihilate all goblins in the forest. He said the elf queen wanted to keep some goblins alive, not out of kindness but for another reason, one he wouldn't bother asking her about. He declared that tonight, he would lead his tribe to find out. Lamphine commanded the goblins to feast on the dead elf and absorb their skills. The simple-minded goblins roared in delight, while Kasana was consumed by fear. Since his betrayal by humans, Lamphine had become cold and cruel to his enemies, a survival tactic, it seemed. He looked at Kasana with an emotionless expression, announcing he would personally deal with her. Kasana was petrified, uttering only faint, choked sounds, followed by a scream that echoed through the forest. It seemed Lamphine had done something truly horrifying. The system announced Lamphine had reached level 30, gaining 50 hydrogen phosphide, 10 strength, 10 defense, and the skills invisibility and night vision. The scene of the elf village. From the elf queen's house came the sounds of moans of pleasure, pleas of exhaustion. Inside, the queen felt heartbroken because her evil desires were not satisfied. She felt regretful that last time she did not catch enough goblins to make tonics for these men. 3 men lay collapsed from exhaustion around her. She suddenly remembered Kasana and asked if she had returned. An elf quickly informed her that Kasana had left on a mission and had not returned. Despite being past her expected arrival time, he suggested sending a party to help Kasana, which would also provide them with more goblins to kill and further boost the tribe's fighting abilities. The queen gave him full authority to send people to help Kasana and kill the goblins. A voice pierced the silence, announcing that Kasana wouldn't be returning today. The words sent a jolt of fear through the group, a stark realization that they were under attack. The elf man was about to draw his weapon to fight, when sharp iron arrows came flying, killing the unfortunate man instantly. The elf queen, with a mix of skills and luck, managed to catch one arrow, but was terrified by the sudden appearance of goblins in her home. Lamthine and his goblins entered through the window. He announced he had captured Kasana and she would soon be carrying his child. He called the elf queen his mother-in-law, declaring they were now a family. The elf queen was disgusted by those words. She was furious and wanted to know what Lamthine had done to her daughter. Lamthine pretended to be emotionless and acted as if he didn't understand what she was talking about. This action ignited the elf queen's anger, and she charged at him, wanting to kill him immediately. However, it seemed that she was exhausted after being served by 3 men, and her attack was like a child's play to Lamthine. He informed her that the elf tribe was currently surrounded, and if she surrendered obediently, he would consider treating them well. The elf queen collapsed to the ground. Feeling her body numb, she couldn't even muster the strength to sit up. Lamthine informed her that the arrow she grabbed earlier had the body fluid of a goblin, which would cause rapid paralysis upon contact. The queen tried to get up in anger. Her body, lacking clothing and covered in sweat, became alluring. Seeing his prey struggling, Lamthine felt intrigued. He said that he knew she had used the goblin's heart as a stimulant. He was surprised that the elves were so depraved and used goblins like that. He guessed that she never imagined a day like this. A day when the goblins she despised would come here for revenge. Hearing these words, the elf queen felt even more scared. She realized that the person in front of her was the strange goblin Kasana mentioned earlier. Screams and cries for help from outside came into the room. The queen asked what was happening, and Lamthine sneered, saying that things seemed to have started. Without giving the elf queen a chance to wait, Lamthine dragged her to the window, allowing her to witness the scene below. He urged her to consider surrendering as soon as possible. Below, the elf village seemed to be burning, flames were everywhere, and war was raging. Goblins were killing the elves. The elves screamed and begged the elf queen to save them, pleading not to be captured by the goblins. Seeing her elf warriors weak against the goblins' attack, the queen's worry and fear overwhelmed her, and she asked a foolish question. She asked Lamthine what he was to her tribe. Lamthine understood what she meant and said that the elf's strength had not weakened. The problem was that his goblin tribe had become stronger, and they had no hope of resistance. When the elves were stronger, they slaughtered the goblins. Now the goblins were stronger, and it was natural for them to slaughter the elves. Lamthine asked her to face reality and make a quick decision to minimize the damage. Lamthine approached the elf queen and whispered in her ear that he still needed more powerful warriors, so he would let her live. Whether the others in her tribe survived would depend on her decision. Right now, outside, the elf men were still being slaughtered, and the girls were being captured by lustful hands. A barbaric scene. The queen's arrogance collapsed, and she knelt down and begged Lamthine promised to fulfill all his demands as long as he did not kill her child. The queen sat down and showed her superiority. The plump fruits were displayed in a revealing way. She assured him that she would bring them with her and bear children for him. The morning after the battle, the sun rose high in the sky, flooding the goblin tribe with a radiant light that made the cruel irony of the place even more apparent. The landscape was indescribably beautiful. But under that glowing sky, tragedy unfolded mercilessly. Kasana, a young elf, had managed to reunite with her mother, the elf queen. But her joy was short-lived, for they were both trapped in a dark destiny. The queen, an elf with a heavy heart, embraced her daughter. There, with tears in his eyes, she apologized. She never imagined that the goblins, those creatures who had always been seen as inferior, could surpass the elves in strength. Now her people were devastated. Only women and children remained, without the ability to protect their lineage or fight for their freedom. Outside the prison where the young elves were held, they had been captured and enslaved. The cruel and ruthless goblins used them as reproductive tools, a sight that broke the queen's heart. She knew they were no longer free and that survival within the goblin tribe was their only future. However, she begged Kasana not to lose hope, though her words were more an attempt at consolation than a true belief. Suddenly Lamthine, the leader of the goblins, appeared beside the prison with a coldness that chilled the blood, ordered them to prepare to have children for him. He promised to provide them with enough food if they obeyed. But if they caused trouble he would kill them mercilessly. The queen, showing calculated submission, accepted her fate, but she made a single request upon seeing the young elves innocently playing with the Gavins. The queen begged Lin Tian that let her take care of those children. Though he was now a goblin, Lin Tian had been human, and understood the bond between mother and child. He hesitated for a moment. But then the system appeared before him with a mission. The mission of maternal love. Gobu, a goblin, interrupted the scene, complaining that she couldn't take care of all the children alone. Suggested the queen take care of them. Lin Tian, understanding that these children were the future of his tribe, acceded to the queen's request. He then checked his strength and found that he had met the requirements for an upgrade. His blood, strength, and defense increased significantly, which took him by surprise, but also filled him with satisfaction. He decided to continue strengthening his power through reproduction with strong women. Convinced that he would soon be ready to take revenge on Louder. Time passed quickly, and a month later the cries of babies echoed in Camp Goblin. The first children had been born, and for some miraculous reason, they all looked like goblins, which horrified their mothers, who refused to accept them as their own. But Lin Tian wasn't worried. He knew that the goblins were creatures with superior vitality. He wanted to know how many children had been born, and Gobu informed him that there were between 30 and 40 new goblins. The conversation was interrupted by a heartbreaking scream from Kasana, which worried Lin Tian, since she was pregnant with his child. Quickly Lin Tian arrived at the place where Kasana and the elf queen were. Kasana was about to give birth, and the queen, with her heart full of worry, begged Lin Tian to help her, since it was her first birth and it seemed that her life was in danger. Lin Tian, knowing what was happening, he asked Gobu to help him with the birth. The queen was surprised to see that a goblin knew about these things. But Kasana, full of anger and pain, shouted Lin Tian to leave, that she did not want him to touch her. Lin Tian, enraged, told her to shut up, reminding her that this was his son. After a while, Lin Tian managed to save Kasana, who, exhausted, fell asleep surrounded by young goblins. Gobu praised his skill, but Lin Tian dismissed it as a minor matter. Soon, however, a scream caught his attention. Elsewhere in the camp, a beautiful elf who had just given birth was tied up. 2 adult goblins were trying to abuse her, ignoring her weak resistance. Lin Tian, enraged, killed one of the goblins, sowing terror in the other. He reminded everyone that he had ordered elves to rest after giving birth, and that anyone who violated the order would pay with their lives. To improve the situation, Lin Tian ordered that the food ration of the elves be increased by an additional apple. These actions made the elf queen begin to see him with different eyes. She told him that it was different from ordinary goblins. But Lin Tian, ignoring it, said it was just a way to make elves more obedient. At the end of an exhausting day, Lin Tian dedicated herself to performing simulations to earn points and be able to exchange them for new technologies. The current story in the system was the revenge of the goblins, with the content that after having captured the elven tribe and fertilized all their women, the time had come for revenge against Louder and their people. The options were clear. Act alone to try to kill the Louder and gain 50 points. Lead a goblin attack to destroy the entire village and gain 30 points, or wait for a better opportunity and gain 10 points. Sitting by the fire, Lin Tian reflected on his decision. Although his current strength was comparable to Louder's, he knew not to underestimate Louder's companions. He finally decided to go it alone and go for the biggest reward. He found an opportunity when Louder was alone and ambushed him. But a human knight showed up to rescue Louder, and Lin Tian died tragically under the knight's sword. The simulation ended abruptly in disastrous failure. Lin Tian had found a sacred knight in a remote place, and Louder and his group would never return. Revenge seemed more difficult than he had imagined. Filled with hatred, he decided he must act fast, trusting Gobu to lead the tribe. In his absence, Lin Tian prepared to enter human territory, despite the elf queen's warnings about the risks. The queen, in an act of cunning, offered her help using invisibility magic to protect him. Although Lin Tian scoffed, he accepted help, knowing that the queen only sought to ensure the safety of her own people. As he left, Gobu shouted to him that she would take care of the tribe and wished him a safe return. But in Lin Tian's heart, darkness and revenge were all that mattered. The stage shifts to the city of Quangmin, where the air feels charged with tension. Gentlemen patrol the streets armed and alert, while the faces of citizens reflect concern. They seem to be looking for something, but they don't notice the shadowy figure lurking in a dark alley. This observer is Lampthian, who stays hidden in the shadows, confused by the presence of the patrollers and the city's heightened defenses. Suspecting that the Holy Knights have something to do with this, Lampthian leaves the deserted alley for a long time. Lamp then walks without hearing anything about Lauder's group, which puzzles him and causes his steps to become more hurried. Thanks to the elf's invisibility spell, he remains unnoticed as he heads to the city's central square, where a crowd has gathered upon noticing a group of armed individuals gathered in front of a large billboard. The board shows a ranking list of the knights in the city. The list itself is not particularly interesting. 1 platinum level adventurer, 2 silver level and the rest bronze level. However, what captures Lin Tian's attention is who Lauder's name is at the top of the list, which confirms Lauder has grown in power. With this useful information in mind, Lampteen knows that he must take the time to collect more data and plan carefully. Rushing could inevitably lead him to failure in his quest for revenge. Following his instinct, he blends in with the crowd and heads to a tavern, knowing that is the best place to get information. To his surprise, before entering the tavern, he hears a familiar voice and a sly smile appears on his face. Inside the tavern, in addition to Lauder and the Knights Templar, there is also Hebra, all happily drinking together. A knight raising his glass expresses his gratitude to Hebra and Lauder for saving him from a 4-armed ape monster. Hebra modestly credits the victory to Captain Lauder, stating that without his exceptional skills he would not have been able to help. Another man, in a sarcastic tone, comments that the monster was too weak, implying that the knight's inability to defeat him demonstrates his weakness. This infuriates the gentleman, who tells him that his story does not concern him and orders him to leave. The situation quickly heats up and they are on the verge of a fight. But the innkeeper steps in, revealing that the dragon on Dragon Island is in its breeding season and has been kidnapping cattle and humans for food. He suggests the two of them go defeat the dragon instead of causing trouble in the tavern. These words catch Lin Tian's attention. He feels a growing concern that if the dragon attacks the city, reinforcements from the capital will not arrive in time. Even if all the adventurers in the city united, they would not be able to resist the attack of those ferocious dragons. Disaster seems to be looming over the city. Lauder breaks the silence with a laugh, saying that a few dragons are nothing to worry about. He trusts the crowd that a holy knight is on her way and that she will join them in defeating the dragons. This news excites those present, especially when Lauder reveals that the holy knight is his teacher. Knowing that a holy knight will aid in battle, the people's confidence rises and Lauder rises to toast the impending victory over the dragons. While everyone celebrates, Lampteen has a different plan in mind. He gets up, pays his bill and leaves, which catches Lauder's attention. He asks why he leaves without joining them for a drink. Lampteen, with an arrogant smile, replies that there will be many opportunities to drink together in the future and then retires. His haughty attitude angers Lauder and his men. Time flies and the people in the city celebrate the arrival of the Holy Knight. Inside a church, a blonde-haired woman prays while Lauder watches her from behind with courtesy. Lauder addresses her as a teacher and informs her of the dragons approaching the city, wreaking havoc in the surroundings. The woman, captivatingly beautiful and dressed in imposing silver armor, takes her weapon and stands, asking if Lauder has prepared everything she requested. Lauder assures him that he has prepared 10 Dragonhouse crossbows and has placed them at the highest points in the city. The knight seems pleased and orders Lauder to organize everything meticulously, since any mistake would be a great shame. When the woman goes outside, the crowd erupts into uproar, which is the first time they have seen the sacred knight, and praise for her beauty is immediate. Some wonder which man could win her heart, while others think it is an unattainable existence even for the king. The woman observes the worried crowd, aware of the gravity of the situation, decides that it is not necessary to gather so many people and orders the knights to disperse the crowd. But before they can do so, the commotion attracts the attention of a dragon that charges against the city, terrorizing everyone and taking one unfortunate person. The knight, visibly worried, announces that this is just a scout dragon and that once he appears more dragon attacks will follow. She orders Lauder to lead his men to the wall and prepare for battle. Outside the city, on a cliff, a goblin hurries to inform his leader about the coming of the dragons. He noticed that there are many guards on the wall and asks what they should do next. The leader, who is none other than Lin Tian, orders him to be silent and wait. It is not yet the time to act. He has lured his army here and hopes the dragons will do damage to the city before he takes his chance to seek revenge. The sky, usually serene over the City of Light, suddenly darkened as a horde of dragons appeared on the horizon, approaching with a ferocity that made more than one tremble. Just when it seemed that the city was going to be devoured by flames, a golden glow streaked through the sky and pierced the chest of one of the dragons, knocking him down immediately. Louder and Heblila, who were observing the scene from below, could not close their mouths in amazement. What the hell is going on? They wondered. It turns out that the attack had been launched by the Saint of the Sword, who from the top of the wall had taken one of the dragon bows and with lethal precision had finished off the beast. "Did you see how it's done?" she asked the gentleman, who was next to her with a look that said, "This is not a game." She wasted no time ordering all the knights to get ready to load their bows. The gentleman nodded, clenching his fist with determination. The knights began to prepare their weapons, and as the dragons approached, a rain of arrows fell on them one to one. The dragons were falling and the excitement among the defenders was rising. "No wonder they use these bows to hunt dragons," thought one of the knights as he watched with a satisfied smile. But the joy was short-lived. Suddenly, the sky filled with purple clouds and ominous thunder, and a deafening roar caught everyone's attention. The mother of dragons, an immense and terrifying creature, appeared on the scene with her wings outstretched and her gaze fixed on mortals who dared to challenge her. The knights, who until a moment had felt invincible, began to recoil from fear, taking hold of them. This wasn't just any dragon. She was the mother of purple gold, a beast that even the most powerful bows couldn't hurt. With a roar that shook the walls, the dragon unleashed a burst of fire that destroyed the bows in an instant. The knights, seeing the impending disaster, began to flee, knowing that the city was on the verge of collapse. But then a blue magic circle appeared on the floor. The sword Saint Alisimia was inside. Drawing her sword as a powerful energy enveloped her. "Don't worry, leave me to Mother Dragon. You continue to defend the city for no," with a firmness that did not admit of discussion. When the dragon unleashed another burst of fire, Alice responded with a legendary technique. The sword energy storm, a shield surrounded the city, blocking the beast's attack. The dragons tried to break through the barrier, but couldn't get through it from the top of a hill. LinkedIn, accompanied by a group of goblins, watched the scene in surprise. "I didn't expect I could stop the mother dragon," a thought. Impressed, the dragon mother, furious, began to emit rays from her body, showing all her power. But Alice wasn't intimidated. With 170 points of health, a strength of 691 and defense of 700, she was more than ready for combat. Leaping into the sky, Alice lunged at the nearby dragons, her sword glowing with a reaper light. The battle was epic. A fight of titans. Meanwhile, LinkedIn, with a mischievous grin, saw the perfect opportunity to take revenge on the humans. He ordered the goblins to descend on the city, splitting into two groups, one to cause a disturbance and one to ambush the unsuspecting. With Alice's barrier weakened, the dragons managed to enter the city, burning everything in their path. Louder, who had managed to slay a dragon but was wounded, looked at the chaos around him and couldn't help but smile thanks to the Sword Saint. "Now I'm a dragon hunter, too," he thought, feeling oddly proud. But his satisfaction quickly faded when a man with his hands on his head came running, shouting that the city was being overrun by goblins. Louder's heart skipped a beat. This doesn't look good, he thought through gritting his teeth. More dragons descended from the sky, attacking the knights, who could barely defend themselves with their shields. Ebola, who was summoning a magic circle, couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Goblins here? That's crazy," she thought, convinced it was a joke. But the reality was much crueler. A woman chased by goblins appeared, screaming louder for help. Seeing this, he froze. "We're in trouble," he murmured as he braced himself to face the new threat. Along with Heblila, they began to chase the goblins without realizing that they were running directly into a trap. The goblins, cunning as ever, were hiding on the rooftops waiting for the perfect moment to attack. As Louder and Heblila approached a sewer, a lurking goblin grinned sinisterly. The trap was set and the time for action had come. The situation in the City of Light was falling apart fast and Louder was at the center of the chaos. Just when he thought he could keep fighting, a goblin appeared out of nowhere and with surprising speed wounded him in the leg. The pain made him fall to the ground, helpless. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the goblins threw themselves at Eblila, throwing a net that caught her completely. Desperate, she began to scream for help, begging Louder to save her as two goblins began to drag her away. The landscape was bleak. More goblins emerging from the shadows, their spears surrounding Louder, pointing directly at him as he clenched his teeth in fury. Louder couldn't help but wonder where so many goblins had come from and how they had invaded the city so easily. Around him, chaos reigned, houses were on fire. The sky covered with dragons. And the city had become a hell. Two gentlemen, seeing louder Libila's desperate situation, decided to come to their aid. "Hold on," they shouted, advancing with determination. But before they could get there, a wave of goblins appeared, completely surrounding them. As the knights struggled to make their way, a shadow slipped behind them. Lintian, with a murderous look that did not bode well. Louder, still on the ground, saw how Lin Tian was sneaking up and began to scream desperately to alert the knights. "Watch out behind you," but his warning came too late. The knights barely had time to turn their heads before Lin Tian, in a lethal motion, drew his dagger and in a blink of an eye, beheaded them mercilessly. Heads rolled across the floor as inert bodies fell like broken dolls. Eblila, upon witnessing this brutal scene, felt a deep terror that left her paralyzed. Meanwhile, Louder, enraged, looked at Lean, who with a mixture of hatred and despair. The bodies of his companions lay before him and Lean, who approached with a mocking smile, savoring his victory. "Did you really think you could get with us that easily?" he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Louder's fury erupted in a voice full of rage. He started cursing the goblins, promising to kill them all. But before he could finish the threat, Lintian kicked him in the face, sending him flying backwards. "Look carefully at the situation, before opening your mouth." He snapped at him with the same coldness with which he had killed the knights. The blow was so strong that Louder lost consciousness as his body fell to the ground. The goblins took the opportunity to subdue Eblila, kneeling her and tying her with ropes. With an eerie calm, Lintian ordered his minions to take them both out of the city through the sewers and take them away. "We'll take care of the archers on the wall," he said, turning to direct his attention to the remaining defenders. The obedient goblins began dragging Louder and Heblila into the darkness of the sewers, while Lin Tian and his party headed for the wall. There, the archers who still resisted were suddenly attacked by a wave of goblins, their cries for help echoing in the air. Upon hearing the screams, Sword Saint Alisemia frowned. "What's going on?" she muttered to herself, unable to believe that the goblins were attacking at that very moment. While Alice tried to process the situation, something much more sinister was happening behind her back. The Dragon Mother, taking advantage of the distraction, began to transform. Her colossal draconic form vanished to give way to a human figure, but no less imposing. With a carefree gesture, she wiped her mouth with her hand and stared at Alice, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "They can't even help themselves," she thought, savoring the advantage she now had. Alice, sensing the change in the air, turned slowly, facing the Dragon Mother, now in her human form. A tense silence fell between them, as if fate itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The atmosphere was full of tension. The energy in the air was palpable, and in the midst of it all, the Mother Dragon took an impressive leap wrapped in a powerful work that made the ground tremble. Her target, the Saint of the Sword. She, with his imperturbable calm, was watching her with a half-mocking smile, asking her if she was worried. As if that weren't enough, she dared to challenge her, hinting that she wanted to see how much dragon blood ran through her veins. But just as the Dragon Mother was about to reach her, the Sword Saint unsheathed her soul with the precision of a surgeon and unleashed his supreme technique. Steel Gale slashes, with lethal precision, threw powerful slashes at her opponent. The Dragon Mother, with a gesture of pure instinct, raised both arms in front of her face, clenched her teeth and managed to block the attack. At the last second, the Saint of the Sword was looking at her with a serenity bordering on indifference. Thinking that the matter with the Dragon Mother was almost settled, she allowed himself a moment of distraction, wondering if Louder had dealt with the dragons and goblins yet. However, her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by an explosion that shook the city, sending several knights into the air. The Saint of the Sword turned her head somewhat confused as she saw the chaos unleashing. The revolt apparently wasn't over. As the Dragon Mother stood up, she noticed the timely arrival of the goblins and couldn't help but smile. Now that the Sword Saint was distracted, she took the opportunity to transform into pure energy and escape, saying goodbye with a touch of mockery. The Sword Saint, also enveloped in a powerful energy, turned around confused by what was happening. The Dragon Mother was already flying away, promising that she would heal herself and not let her defeat her so easily. The Sword Saint, realizing that she had missed the opportunity, put a hand to her mouth to clean her sin while fury took over his gaze with an icy tone. She promised she would not rest until he reached Dragon Island and wiped out his entire race. Hours later, darkness began to envelop the city. The Saint of the Sword, relentless, had wiped out many of the goblins still lurking. Holding her sword in one hand, she extended the other to one side, walking with a disturbing serenity as she asked the knights where Louder was. In her mind, she couldn't help thinking that they were useless for not being able to kill simple goblins. Opposite her, a wounded knight sat on the ground with a woman in torn clothes and a terrified expression beside her. The knight, with one hand over the wound and the other resting on the ground, revealed that Louder and Flya had been captured by the goblins. Hearing this, the Sword Saint clenched her teeth so tightly that it looked like she might break as her gaze filled with fury. Wondering how such a thing could have happened. The city was littered with the corpses of knights. The wounded man explained that these goblins were not common, but that their strength was comparable to that of a great species. So much so that even Louder had not been able to defeat them. The Sword Saint looked at the ground before turning around with a clenched fist and a determination that led her to decide that she would massacre all the goblin tribes of the Enchanted Woods. The woman, with a confused expression, grabbed her arm before she could leave, crying and sadly begging her to stay. Since no one knew if the evil goblins would strike again, the townspeople began to approach, kneeling before the Saint of the Sword. They explained that they were people of the people and of the Empire, also asking her to stay with them. The Sword Saint, staring blankly, recognized in her mind that they were right. Protecting the temple was his duty, even more than rescuing a fellow hero squadron. If Louder wanted to blame anyone, he could only blame himself for being too weak to kill simple goblins. She decided that she would ask the royal family for help. In the goblin tribe, meanwhile, everything seemed to go on as normal. The little goblins were running around, informing everyone that the chief had returned. Limpian and his party, dragging with them Raya and Louder bound by their hands. The goblins and elves of the tribe approached, wondering where he had captured these humans. Without much consideration, the goblins threw Flya to the ground and sat her down beside Louder near a rock. The goblin, who wore an emblem on his chest, turned and as he walked away, gave the order to the others to behave. Louder, with his hands tied, looked at the goblin with a look full of fury. Gritting his teeth, the Gavin approached an elf and began to berate her, which did not go unnoticed by Louder, who explained to Flya that even those goblins had many elves captive. And Freya, blushing and breathing hard, told him that perhaps there was some kind of hero in this tribe. Louder, worried, leaned over and asked her if she was feeling better. She clasped her hands together, closed her eyes and began to use her power, causing a golden energy to surround her body. As she explained, the poison was very strong and his body still needed time to recover. At that moment, Lin Tian, with his hands in his pockets, appeared smiling, seeing that the poison wore off so quickly. He couldn't help but praise Ifria's incredible resilience. Opening her eyes, she began to tremble as Louder looked at him with hatred. But before he could do anything, a goblin appeared and grabbed his arm, placing the other hand on his head. Limpian, for his part, grabbed Ifria's leg, which made her panic. She quickly moved away and asked him how he knew her name and what he was trying to do to her. Lin Tian, with a widening smile, asked her if she really wanted to know what he planned to do to her. Then he sank his sharp nails into her leg, causing Ifria to open her mouth and begin to scream in pain as she screamed. Lin Tian enjoyed the moment by her side. Louder was trying to do something, but the goblin had a tight grip on his arms. Seeing this, Louder became even angrier. If with a murderous look he ordered Lin Tian to stop. The goblin responded with a slap that sent Louder crashing to the ground on one hand and one elbow. As he rose, Limpian pulled his nails from Ifria's leg. Louder watched him with disdain, realizing that Linthian was a being with high intelligence. Asked him if he had not considered the consequences of capturing them, warning that the power of the Sword Saint could wipe out the entire Goblin's tribe in one blow. Linthian smiled serenely and revealed that the Sword Saint would also be his prey. But it was not the right time. He had already sent someone to erase his tracks, and even if she wanted to find them, she could not do so. He got up, wiped his hands with a handkerchief, turned his head, and ordered the second-generation goblins out to hunt more monsters in the forest. While Sifria writhed in pain on the floor, the goblin approached, put his hand to his chest, bowed his head to Limpian and replied that he had understood this operation. It had grown so big that humans could not ignore it. Limpian knew he had to complete his evolution before the humans would come knocking on his door. With one foot on the Louder's chest, Linter warned him that he would start asking him questions and that he had better answer because if he didn't cooperate he wasn't sure that part of his body would end up missing. Louder gritted his teeth, knowing that things were not looking good at all. Linter kept his foot on Lauder's chest as he rested a hand on his knee and drew a dagger. A murderous energy surrounded his body as he asked in a threatening voice if humans liked to imprison goblins in secret and torture them. Lauder, in a panic, looked at him in terror and shouted at him that he didn't know what he was talking about, accusing him of utter nonsense. Unflinching, Ninten told him he had been too slow to respond and with a swift movement cut off his ear with the dagger. Lauder let out a cry of pain, putting a hand to his ear as he tried to stop the bleeding. And Freya, with both hands on her wound, was visibly shaking and looking at him in panic. Lincoln stood up, touching his head with one hand while maintaining a somber silence. Lauder's ear fell to the ground and as he writhed in pain, he looked at Linthian and explained that everything they did was to protect humanity, adding that it was their duty to exterminate monsters like him. Linthian watched coldly and asked if he really believed they were doing this out of humanity and obligation, or if it was simply an excuse to constantly improve the status of his hero squad. Then Linthian revealed that he knew Lauder and Freya had massacred an entire village and goblins and that people had praised them for it. It was much easier to eliminate the humans who were in the way along with the monsters, instead of saving them. He asked how many human victims they had on their hands, those who claimed to be doing their duty. Both Lauder and Ifria were stunned, not knowing how a goblin could know everything they had done. Ninten put a hand to his face, stared at them, and with a smile told them the conversation was over. He was different. He didn't need to pretend to be righteous because he was innately evil. Then he revealed to them that this monster was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget. They clean. She began to have fun with Ifrella, who closed her eyes blushing and asking Lauder for help. Lin Tian tormented her in such a way that her eyes filled with tears of despair. Lauder, mad, yelled at Lin Tian to take his filthy hands off her. Before he could do anything, the goblins tied his arms, and Freya opened her mouth sobbing while Linthian returned the same words she had told her before. "This is just the beginning, you better hold on." Linthian put one hand on her shoulder, grabbed her neck with the other, and, looking at Lauder, told her that now his dear Lauder would be able to enjoy the show. A group of goblins approached and Freya Linthian stood up and with an evil smile decided to see what those goblins were going to do to her. Lauder felt an indescribable terror as he realized what was about to happen. As Ifrilla lay on the ground, the goblins began to tear her clothes. It was a quiet day in the goblin camp, or at least as quiet as it could be in a place full of moody green creatures. One of the goblins, in his typical shrill voice, told another that it was his turn to watch the captive woman. Besides, he added with an air of importance that the leader had ordered that she would not be treated so badly. After all, it was important to keep her alive. The current guard, whose face was full of morbidity, let out a harsh laugh, mocking the idea that she deserves it all. He growled, making it clear that for him the woman was receiving just what she deserved. Freya, the aforementioned captive, was in a deplorable state. Her clothes, if they could still be called that, were torn to shreds, leaving little to the imagination. Her situation was hopeless, but even so her spirit had not been completely broken. In another corner of the camp, Lauder, a human prisoner, watched Freya desperately. With his voice ragged and full of anguish, he begged her to hold on a little longer. He knew that if she gave herself up the goblins would come at her mercilessly. But before he could say anything else, a goblin hit him hard, crushing his head against the ground. Despite the pain, Freya, with a calm that surprised everyone, told Lauder that she was fine, not to worry. But as expected, the goblin guardian did not like this at all and immediately approached, ordering her to shut up once and for all. Meanwhile, from a safe distance, the elf clans' mother and daughter watched the situation with concern for them. It was clear that Lin, the goblin leader, must have some special grudge against these two humans to treat them with such cruelty. Kasana, the daughter, couldn't help but think that, despite her own precarious situation, at least they had fruit to eat, unlike the unfortunate humans. Suddenly, Gabu, a female goblin, appeared on the scene carrying several apples. As she handed them out to the elves, she told them that he had heard the Lean mention his desire for revenge on the humans, which explained the brutal treatment they received. The clan mother then remembered a rule Lin Tian had told them. If they followed his orders to the letter they would be rewarded with kindness. This made her reflect on the one thing that made Lin different from any other goblin she'd ever met. Little by little she began to feel attracted to him, longing inside to be won over by Lin, even if that meant being treated badly. Again, however, Kasana, noticing her mother's thoughts, rebuked her, telling her to stop thinking nonsense. Elsewhere in the camp, A goblin ran up to Lin informing her that the second-generation goblins who had left home had returned. Lin found himself wondering why they'd come back so early. He turned to find a huge goblin. A real giant with a club over his shoulder. This being known as a level 33 Gap Maniac. Surprised Lin. He knew that second-generation goblins could quickly evolve to impressive levels. But this maniac was almost on the level of Lin himself. Intrigued, Lin asked him why they had returned early. The maniac Gap explained that they had eliminated all the nearby monsters. So they had to head west of the forest. There they met several large goblins who were massacring others of their kind belonging to another tribe. Lin, surprised by this revelation, asked what that tribe was. The maniacal Gab informed him that it was the Bloody Fang tribe. A band of giant goblins, everyone larger than the last. But instead of freaking out, Lin smiled in a strange way, as if he were seeing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He figured if he could capture the leader of that tribe and create one-third generation of even stronger goblins, his tribe would have a better chance of resisting the oppression of humans. Just then, Louder, with a bitter smile and coughing up blood, told Lin that he was crazy for dreaming of conquering tribes, when in reality he was about to die trying. Louder, still a bit dazed by beatings and torment, he couldn't help but issue a warning to Lim. He told him in a trembling but defiant voice that no matter how strong the goblins grew, his brother was a knight and that sooner or later those monsters would be annihilated. But Lin did not let himself be intimidated. He turned slowly, his expression so serious that the air around him seemed to freeze. He warned Louder that if he kept his mouth shut, he might be forgiven. Louder, however, with a sarcastic laugh, ignored the threat and continued laughing. This was enough for Lin in a voice that admits no reply. He ordered the goblins to approach, mentioning that there was a human in the tribe who had not received proper treatment. In a matter of seconds, a crowd of gabblers surrounded Louder, who suddenly realized what awaited him. The goblins began to play with him, if such torture could be called games. They inspected every part of his body with a mixture of curiosity and cruelty, mocking the softness of his skin and flesh, something unusual for men in the human species. According to them, despite the pain and humiliation, Louder continued to scream, insisting that the knights of the city would finish off all the monsters of Lin's tribe sooner or later. But on the other side of the camp, Afrella, who had been smarter than Louder, decided to be quiet, knowing full well what the fate of her foolish companion would be. After several hours of incessant torture, Louder lost consciousness. His body couldn't take any more games from the goblins. As night fell, Goblin Camp was filled with celebrations. You could see the fire burning with large chunks of meat roasting as the entire tribe celebrated. Lin, in the middle of it all, sat next to the clan mother and Gabu, both selfies. The clan mother, with a mixture of curiosity and concern, asked Lin if he really planned to attack the Bloody Fang tribe. Lin smiled with unsettling assurance and told them that his ambition was not only to attack that tribe, but also to capture its leader. "I want to be the strongest," Lin said firmly. And to mark the beginning of that new era, he decided to give his tribe a name. "From today on, we'll call ourselves the Tien tribe," he proclaimed. The second-generation goblins, euphoric at the news, began to shout and celebrate, happy to have an identity of their own. Between laughter and dancing, the whole tribe proudly chanted their new name. As the celebration continued, Gabu, somewhat worried, approached Lin to warn him that many of the tribes he planned to face were really powerful and that capturing their leaders would not be an easy task. But Lin, biting a piece of meat, told her not to worry. He still had an ace up his sleeve, something he hadn't used until now. Hearing this, the camera focuses on Freya, who was still chained like an animal obeying Lin's orders. The next day, Lin was already in action. He had gone to the enchanted forest in the west, where he received the Bloody Fang tribe. As he made his way through the forest, he observed the large structures and knew he was near. These goblins are big, he thought. But maybe they're not so dumb as not to try to solve this by talking. However, his hope quickly faded when he saw the fear in the eyes of every goblin in the tribe. Suddenly, the leader of the Bloody Fang tribe appeared through a large door. And Lin couldn't help but gasp. The leader was no ordinary goblin, which was a heroic species. A level 50 Warhammer goblin with stats so high that he was practically invincible. At that moment, Lin felt a twinge of nervousness. But she couldn't afford to show weakness. His smile tightened as he stared at the formidable new obstacle that stood in his way. Lin watched the leader of the Bloodfang tribe with a mixture of disbelief and surprise. This is the guy who's supposed to intimidate us, he thought as he watched him. With a combined battle force of barely 900, a group of goblin warriors should be able to deal with him without any problems. But there was a small drawback: capturing him alive. Because of its colossal size, the poison that would normally paralyze anyone with a couple of drops barely had any effect on this mastodon. And Lin, with their ever-active mind, was already beginning to plot another plan, one much more twisted and diabolical. Suddenly he remembered the prison technique Freya had used against him. A sinister smile crossed his face. It would be perfect for this occasion, he thought. And so the plan was set in motion. Subscribe and leave a like that this is going to get good. It was time for Lin to meet Ifrila. But before that, a mini-goblin interrupted his thoughts, announcing in a trembling voice that if they followed his orders, the human they had captured would not last much longer. Lena barely glanced at him and smiled mischievously. There she was, the prisoner on the floor, babbling nonsense about redemption. And the Lord approached her calmly, grabbing a bowl of water. The woman, in the midst of her delirium, prayed to be killed to atone for her sins. But Lin, ignoring his pleas, knelt beside him and began to clean his wounds. The contact of the warm water on her skin was so comforting that for 1 second, she felt relieved. Her mind, in its state of confusion, came to think that someone had finally arrived to help her. However, when she opened her eyes and saw who was in front of her, everything changed. Freya screamed with all her strength. The image of Lin, the same goblin who had tormented her by cleaning her wounds, was a cruel irony. Between her shouts and screams she prayed that he would not come any closer. The desperation in her voice was evident, but Lin, without a word, slapped her across the face. Suddenly the bang resounded in the room. Then, without losing his composure, he grabbed her by the waist and half-hugged her, covering her with his body. "Your punishment is over," he told her coldly. Freya, completely broken, couldn't believe what she heard through tears. She asked if it was really true. Lin, smiling smugly, assured her that he always kept his word. But of course, there was a condition. "You will have to choose a new belief," he told her confused. Freya asked what belief Lin was talking about. Always the master of twisted turns, he gave her 2 options. She could choose to believe in God or in him. Lin's plan was clear. He wanted to turn Freya into one of his pets, a sudden loyalist who would spare her continued suffering in exchange for her complete devotion. Freya, caught in her despair, changed radically. She suddenly started acting like a hungry dog, licking Lin's fingers one to one, without any trace of disgust. Our boy knew his plan had worked. With a satisfied smile, he consoled her by telling her that she had made a wise decision from that moment on. Freya accepted Lin as her only teacher. When he asked her what she preferred to be called, she, without hesitation, responded with an obedient guff. Lin, pleased, picked her up and carried her to the well of fresh water. It was time for his new pet to have a decent bath. Freya, now completely submissive, called him my lord, grateful for what she saw as a kind treatment and willing to give up everything she had for him. While they both cooled off in the water, Lin couldn't help cutting back on his previous life when that same woman had tortured him mercilessly to the brink of death. But now the tables had turned. This wouldn't happen again. Back in the present, Lee asked Freya to use her sacred light cage ability. The poor woman, already so traumatized, had forgotten even how to do it. Lin, always ready, pulled out an instruction book and handed it to him. After reading the spell, a cage of bright light appeared before them. Lin congratulated his new pet for a job well done, and together they walked towards the cages where they kept one of them captive. Louder was astonished to see Freya walking shoulder to shoulder with Lin. In total shock, he approached the bars asking Freya if Louder had recovered, with his eyes bulging with despair. "I couldn't take it anymore. Kill him," he shouted to Freya. "Use your magic to kill that damn goblin. Restore my body right now." For Louder, victory was within reach. With a trembling smile, he convinced himself that he was about to be saved. But what he didn't know was that he was terribly wrong. Lin, always attentive to detail, turned slowly toward him with a smile that didn't promise anything. "Well, you're completely wrong, friend," he told him in a tone of restrained mockery. Louder, unable to believe it, glared at him, convinced that the whole thing was a bad joke. But Lin's words resonated in the small cell. Ephraia has already voluntarily decided to join our tribe. Louder roared, the color of his face turning red with anger. There's no way the daughter of the leader of the Holy Order has domesticated herself and taken refuge in a tribe of goblins. The idea was unthinkable to him. Lean was talking pure nonsense, but when Ephraia, without anyone asking her, knelt at the feet of her new teacher, everything changed. The woman, who had once been strong and noble, now behaved like a submissive creature. "I do it of my own free will," she whispered, stroking Lean's boots. "Nobody forced me to do anything." Louder's expression froze. His disbelief gave way to deepest horror. Saliva began to slide slowly down the corners of his mouth as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. There was no way Frella, the leader's powerful daughter, could have sunk so low. The crash, it was so big that his sanity slowly began to crumble. An uncontrollable laugh began to burst from his chest, turning into maniacal laughter. "What have you done?" he stammered, laughing. "This will be your end." Goblin Lin, still calm, watched Louder slip into his madness. The prisoner, now completely unhinged, spat threats between laughter. "You and your insignificant race will be annihilated," shrieked the Sacred Order. "He will exterminate you all and your existence will be but an insignificant memory." Louder was still laughing, his mouth open in a grotesque grimace of false triumph, convinced that human power would end Lin and his entire race. Lin Tian, who until that moment had been enjoying the emotions of the moment, was shocked when he heard these words. He didn't expect Ibrahim to have such a complicated past, a more valuable jewel than he thought. He knew well that the humans would not leave this matter lightly and that they would soon send powerful warriors to rescue her. But as a good strategist, he decided not to show concern. After a brief pause, Lin Tian thanked Louder for the information. "You've earned a reward," he said with a calm that only increased the tension. Lin Tian called the guard Goblin 1, whose name was, curiously enough, Goblin, because parents Goblin are not the most creative. "Make sure our friend Louder is well entertained," he added, giving him an unmistakable look. The guard smiled. Or so it seemed, his mouth full of misaligned fangs as he cracked the whip in his hand. Louder swallowed, knowing that things would only get worse. Lin Tian, aware that time was his enemy, knew he had to move fast. The target was the Blot Fan tribe, a fierce and disorganized group that with the right strategy could easily be subdued. "Ypres, come with me," he said, knowing she would be a crucial piece in his next move. Together they would conquer this tribe. Or at least that was the plan. Meanwhile, at Camp Bloodfan, the atmosphere was one of pure anticipation. A small goblin ran to the tribal chief, informing him that everything was ready for the attack. The chief, a huge monster of muscle and scars, nodded in satisfaction. Today they were going to destroy the southern goblin tribe and take the elves captive. It will be a party, he thought with a sinister smile. But his moment of celebration was interrupted by a commotion. Entrance one of the guards. Goblin appeared nervously, reporting that a strange goblin had entered the camp and was demanding to see the chief. The chief laughed, surprised at the impudence. Who in their right mind would come out here to confront him? The strange goblin was, of course. Lin Tian entered with absolute calm, greeting the chief with a politeness that was completely out of place in this hostile environment. "I know you are a level goblin, hero. Almost as intelligent as a human," Lin Tian said with a smile that was more dangerous than friendly. The chief, confused and annoyed, watched Lin Tian critically, as if he could not decide if what he saw was really a goblin or some strange variation. Lin Tian, however, wasted no time in formalities. "I am the chief of the crazy tribe," he introduced himself. "And I have come to capture you and all who follow you. You have two choices, surrender or die." Chief Bloodfan, known for his explosive temper, could not contain his laughter at such a threat. This tiny goblin has lost his mind, he thought with a cruel smile. He extended his gigantic hand toward Lin Tian, ready to crush it like an insect. "It's a good day to die," he murmured as he grabbed Lin Tian's head. But before he could close his fist, a strange sensation ran through his arm. Suddenly, his hand was no longer there. With a swift, precise movement, Lin Tian had drawn a concealed knife and cut off the chief's arm before he could even react. Silence fell over the goblins around as the boss's huge hand fell to the ground. Still clenched, in a useless gesture, the goblins watched in shock what had just happened. Lin Tian only limited himself to shaking the dust off his clothes and looking up at the wounded boss. "What did it say about crushing me?" he asked with a cold smile. The chief of the Blofan tribe lay on the ground screaming in pain as blood gushed from his arms. The Senate. His face bruised with fury. He issued a desperate order to his warriors, kill him quickly. Without hesitation, the goblins of his tribe charged toward Lin Tian, determined to avenge their leader with knives and clubs in hand. But Lin Tian, as always, had a plan. With an almost disturbing serenity, he raised his hand and with a simple signal gave an order that changed everything. "It's time," he murmured. Suddenly the shadows shifted, and from the dark corners of the camp a rain of sharp spears pierced the air and pierced the bodies of the attacking goblins. The battle cries became screams of terror and confusion. "Where did these come from?" shouted one of the goblins of the Bloodfont tribe, unable to understand how the enemies had appeared so suddenly. The attackers, however, were not just any group of goblins. They were Lin Tian assassins, trained in the art of stealth, moving with the precision of deadly shadows. They had developed these abilities after consuming male elves, who possessed mystical knowledge that, when devoured, granted them abilities to move in absolute silence. Now they used that power to ambush and massacre the warriors of the Blofan One tribe of the goblins of Lin Tian. With a spear still dripping blood, he approached his leader. "Do we completely destroy the camp?" he asked in a voice that sounded more like a hiss. Lin Tian, without taking his eyes off the wounded chief who was watching him with hatred, nodded calmly. "Kill them all," he replied as if he were giving a routine order in a matter of seconds. The hidden graven spread out across the camp. The advantage of surprise attack, coupled with their sharp weaponry, was devastating. The members of the Blufan tribe fell one after another, their resistance broken by the speed and lethality of Lin Tian assassins. The chief of the tribe, now fully aware that he had been deceived, was trying to process what had happened. He had thought that Lin Tian was just a lunatic with unbridled arrogance. But in reality it had all been a setup. From the beginning, as he bled to death, his thoughts turned to one thing: escape. He knew that, despite everything, his physical strength was formidable. If he managed to escape, he could regroup and take revenge. However, before he left there was one last thing he wanted to do: kill that insolent little goblin. With one last burst of fury, the chief lunged at Lin Tian. His giant fist, loaded with all its strength, was ready to crush him, to end the bastard's life before he could enjoy his victory. But Lin Tian, instead of dodging or defending herself, remained motionless, watching the boss with a mocking smile. It was as if he had foreseen it. "Everything is time," Lin Tian said with icy calm. Hebra, who had been watching in silence, closed her eyes for a moment. In the blink of an eye, a flash of golden light filled the camp. A cage of magical light materialized around the tribal chief, Bloodfang trapping him. The boss crashed into the walls of light again and again, roaring in frustration. But no matter how much force he applied, he couldn't escape. "What kind of magic is this?" a goblin shouted. "I shouldn't be able to use light magic." The answer to his confusion came in the form of a vision that stunned him. At Lin Tian's feet, a human figure crawled with an expression of worship on its face. She was Hebra, the daughter of the temple leader. But instead of the proud warrior he remembered, she behaved like an obedient dog, waiting for her master's approval. Lin Tian, with a malevolent smile, stroked Thread's head casually. "You've done well, my good dog," her words told him, loaded with a cruelty that only made Hebra blush with pleasure. Female with a lecherous smile, arched her back and let her curves attract even more attention. There was no trace of the nobility that had once characterized it. The darkness had consumed her, and in her eyes there was only submission and devotion to Lin Tian. The chief of the Blufam tribe, despite being wounded and trapped, continued to curse Lin Tian with every breath. His pride was the only thing left to him, and although he knew he couldn't win, he wouldn't give up. He was screaming, spitting blood and hate. But Lin Tian didn't flinch. He was satisfied with the result. Everything had gone according to plan. "You'd better accept your fate," Lin Tian said coldly, looking at the chief as if he were little more than a crushed insect. "Your glory days are over and now the world belongs to me." A new dawn lit up the goblin tribe. But in the dark dungeon things were far from peaceful. The limp body of the tribal chief, Brodo, lay tied to a huge boulder with pools of blood covering the ground. Not far away, Lin Tian watched the scene with a small dagger in her hand. A modest tool for such a terrifying spectacle. The leader Goblin, a beast of heroic rank, had finally been subdued. After a hard struggle, Lin Tian let out a sigh of relief. The threat had been neutralized in the adjoining cell. Louder trembled as he witnessed the brutality Lin Tian had unleashed. How such a small being had captured a gavel of such magnitude? Louder asked, astonished and frightened. Meanwhile, the elf queen and Gobu had been summoned to the site. Lin Tian, with her characteristic lack of tact, ordered Gobu to supervise forced procreation between elven women and the defeated goblin, making sure to select only those who could reproduce. Gobu, always willing to serve his leader, accepted the mission with enthusiasm. Without wasting any time, the Tina pushed Ulfric contemptuously toward Gobu, demanding that she too submit to the imposed fate. Terror was palpable on Urfa's face. With that matter resolved, Lin Tian prepared to execute her next plan. She addressed the elf queen, asking her to help him change his clothes, since he had to meet a friend. The queen, surprised, asked him who this mysterious friend could be. Lin Tian only smiled enigmatically and replied that he was someone very important. The queen couldn't help but feel a chill when she heard those words. Lin Tian had been observing Louder's arrogance and the singularity of Urfa's status, and she knew that human reinforcements would soon arrive. At their current strength they could only face ordinary knights. But a saint swordsman would be another story. Raising children for a goblin of heroic rank would take too long. So he needed a temporary solution. And that friend he spoke of was none other than the dreaded mother dragon on the vast coast. Lin Tian stood before the corpses of two gigantic beasts tied one to the other. There was a motive behind this grotesque scene. Dragon Island was over 100 kilometers offshore and Lin Tian, being pragmatic as always, decided to use the scouting dragons as transport to attract one of those winged giants. He placed the bodies on the beach, trusting that the stench of blood would be irresistible. It was not long before a dragon appeared attracted by the feast that awaited it. And Lin Tian, with an agility that never ceased to surprise, hid inside the body of one of the beasts, securing a free trip to Dragon Island. The devouring dragon quickly took flight with the flesh between its claws. With impressive speed, he crossed the vast ocean and finally landed on the island. Without wasting time, he threw the food into a huge well and left quickly, as if something on that island will terrify him deeply. The Tene, along with the bodies of the beasts, fell onto a colossal pile of bones, which cushioned the impact of the fall. With some effort he emerged from the corpse in which he had hidden, satisfied that his plan had worked perfectly. His observation had been correct. These dragons didn't hunt for themselves. They just gathered food. Now that he had arrived at the fearsome Dragon Island, Lin Tian knew that the real challenge was about to begin. Lin Tian's next task was to find the Dragon Mother, and he didn't have to wait long. As he stood in the darkness of the cave, he felt something appear behind him. A gigantic eye radiating a light that seemed to come from death itself. Watching him foolishly, the creature staring at him was none other than the colossal mother dragon. Compared to her enormous size, Lin Tian was nothing more than an insignificant ant. The dragon mother spoke in a voice that resounded like thunder in the darkness. She said she recognized him, that she knew who he was. He was the leader of the goblins who had attacked the human city a few days ago. And she wanted to know what he was doing in their territory. With a threatening air, she warned him that if he didn't give him a good reason, she would devour him. At that same moment, other dragons appeared around her, their terrifying eyes fixed on Lin Tian, ready to attack. However, Lin Tian was not intimidated. He calmly asked the dragon mother to calm down. He had come with a proposal for cooperation between his tribes. This suggestion surprised the dragon mother. It was the first time she had encountered a goblin who showed signs of intelligence. Intrigued, she was willing to listen to what he had to say. As he spoke, the mother dragon began to transform into a humanoid form. Her new appearance was that of a woman of captivating beauty, although the majestic and fearsome presence of a legendary creature continued to envelop her with a touch of curiosity. She asked Lin Tian to explain to her the benefits of that cooperation, making it clear that if his proposals did not convince her, she would not hesitate to devour him. Lin Tian did not flinch with his usual smile. He reminded the dragon mother of her thirst for revenge against the holy sword for the wounds it had inflicted on her in the past. He explained that the benefits of their cooperation had already been demonstrated in the recent battle in the human city. Thanks to the goblin attack, the dragon mother had escaped a problematic situation. This explanation surprised the dragon, who couldn't help but feel amused at the audacity of an insignificant goblin plotting against the very holy sword. But more than surprise, what piqued the dragon mother's interest was Lin Tian's audacity. With a growing smile, she wanted to know more about Goblin's plan and, above all, how he intended to confront the mad bitch. How she referred to the holy sword. He stepped forward, placing one of his huge hands on Lin Tian's shoulder like a tiny toy. She wanted to know how a small, weak group of goblins dared challenge a living legend like the Holy Sword. And most importantly, she wanted to know the exact plan. Lin Tian, always calculating, he smiled mischievously. He explained that a direct attack on someone like the Holy Sword would not work. It wasn't enough to face his brute force. The real strategy would be to attack her heart. Destroy everything she valued and kill her slowly, stripping her of everything she loved. The dragon mother let out a terrifying laugh that echoed throughout the cave. She understood Lin Tian's approach and loved the idea of using the goblins as tools to do the dirty work, without involving his own dragons. It was just what she wanted. Lin Tian was satisfied, their conversation had borne fruit, and the alliance was sealed. The mother dragon, impressed, admitted that she did not expect to find such an intelligent goblin among his own. The more she looked at him, the more she liked him. As she watched him, an idea crossed her mind. Maybe Lin Tian deserved a reward. The situation was tense and Lin, with that confident smile that seemed out of step with the chaos around him, commented with an air of superiority on the dragon's behavior in the midst of a crucial event. He felt in control of the situation, or so it seemed. But just at that moment, the woman with demonic features who seemed carved into the very essence of the underworld gave him a cold and carefree look, as if Lin were an insect under her boot. "You dismissed," in a tone so contemptuous that it almost bordered on indifference. "You're not even interesting enough to bother me by saying it." She casually leaned against a gigantic creature that followed her like a shadow. The beast, a monster that would have frozen anyone's blood, sat quietly beside her, almost like a domesticated pet. The demonist, with a mischievous smile, was watching Lin Tian with eyes that were clearly plotting something. "You've won an award, I suppose," she said as she toyed with the idea in her head, as if you were choosing between different forms of fun twisted. The scene, though calm, smelled of danger. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a peaceful town was interrupted by a brutal act. A crucified man surrounded by creatures in rudimentary armor hung exhausted. His body was covered in wounds, but what hurt most was the uncertainty eating away at him. "Why haven't the gentlemen arrived?" I thought desperately. The minutes seemed to be running out now. Although he knew his time was running out, he couldn't give up. Despite the pain, he made a plan to escape. If he could get to high ground where there were fewer goblins, he might be able to escape. But then something in the sky took his breath away. A dragon flew closer, its roar sounding like a warning. The man began to struggle with his bonds, desperately begging for the goblins to release him before the beast incinerated all the goblins. On the other hand, they seemed to be preparing for battle. They formed a defensive line, ready to face the monster next to them as it descended with visible fury. The villagers, watching in shock, could not believe what they were seeing. "What's a dragon doing here?" they murmured among themselves, whispering their confusion. One of them pointed out something strange. A figure mounted on the dragon's back that was approaching with clear intentions. The rider, with a posture full of authority, shouted in a powerful voice, "I'm back." The goblins, hearing his voice, began to tremble with terror. It was their leader. The rider had returned. It was no other than Lin, who climbed down from the creature calmly, gently stroking its head as he reassured it. The dragon, obedient as a faithful dog, responded to his touch. The goblins burst into cheers, praising their leader for his triumphant return. Meanwhile, the crucified man stared in disbelief, trying to process what was happening. How can these creatures be so loyal to you? His mind wondered, struggling to make sense of the situation. At that moment, the scene changed in a bustling town. The heavy footsteps of a massive armored figure echoed through the plaza. An army of knights, led by an imposing woman, awaited instructions. "Get up," she ordered in a firm and authoritative voice. She was the saint of the sword, and her presence emanated power. The knights, still kneeling in bow, rose quickly at the urgency in her voice. The saint had no time to waste. "It's time to proceed with the rescue plan," she ordered. And the knights nodded resolutely. Back in the digital world, a screen showed a simulation. Lin was inside that system, surprised by a new option that had appeared. The third option indicated that for a limited time there would be no threats from the Sword Saint, which gave him a clear strategic advantage. Without much thought, he selected that option to accelerate the progress of his mission. Time accelerated. A month passed in the blink of an eye and Lin, now transformed, washed with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty the consequences of his decision. He had reached level 50, but something didn't add up. Although his stats had improved, he felt that his power was not what he expected. His reflection was interrupted when one of his subordinates burst into the room with alarming news. Mr. Lin, the newborn goblins, most of them were born dead. Her voice full of urgency and concern said. Lin, unable to process what he had just heard, quickly headed to the scene of the disaster. There the goblin mothers wept inconsolably, cradling their little lifeless bodies. It was a devastating scene. The air full of pain and silence. Lin, heart sinking, knelt beside one of the mothers. What went wrong? He asked in a low voice, unable to understand what had caused such a tragedy. The mother, with her eyes full of tears, could only answer, I don't know, only 3 have survived, but they are very weak. And so, in that sickness of lamentation and hopelessness, Lin realized that his victory was not as sweet as he had imagined. The captive man, bound and full of fury, taunted Lin from above, hurling venomous words at him. Did you really think you could create a strong generation of goblins out of those weak offspring? His insulting tone only worsened the already desperate situation. While Lilo watched with intense but fixed calm without looking away, Lilo questioned, suggesting that the captive perhaps knew the reason behind the tragedy. I was beginning to suspect his involvement or knowledge of what had happened. The captive burst into mocking laughter, disdainfully revealing that the higher-ranking goblins were having increasing difficulty producing viable offspring. He mocked the Yin, ridiculing him for believing that reproductive power alone would be enough to dominate the world. Lin stood up and confidently, sarcastically thanking the captive for his belated revelation. With determined calm, he suggested that this information, while useful, was too late to change his plans. Then he handed the captive over to Gabo Mad, instructing him to take care of him, but warning him not to kill him just yet. Gabo Mad accepted the task enthusiastically, laughing as he expressed his gratitude for the opportunity. The angry captive shouted with a vengeful threat, declaring that even if he became a demon, he would never forgive the protagonist. His rage and desperation were palpable as he swore revenge. Lin, with a serious expression, recognized that it was already too late to create a new generation of goblins heroes. He understood that the immediate priority was to gather a large number of goblins heroes. Otherwise, the chances of winning against the Sword Saints would be slim. Deep in his thoughts, he contemplated what method could help the goblins level up quickly. Suddenly, a dark dragon with glowing red eyes emerged from the shadows. Lin turned and saw the familiar red dragon, its powerful presence looming over him, its bright eyes capturing his attention. He was slightly surprised, unsure of the reason for the dragon's sudden appearance. But he kept his composure. As they both looked at each other, he reached out his hand to touch the dragon's face, wondering about the strange situation unfolding before him. He speculated if the dragon's behavior might be related to a special transformation during its mating season. With a firm step, the dragon's powerful claw advanced. The dragon began to undergo a surprising transformation, taking on a more humanoid appearance, with delicate features and closed eyes radiating a mysterious calm. The transformation completed its cycle and the dragon revealed herself in a seductive humanoid form. Her appearance was now incredibly beautiful, with a shy expression and an attractive pose. Lin, surprised and visibly flushed, realized that this transformation was probably the special circumstance she had spoken of, interpreting it as a possible benefit intended for him. Suddenly, the dragon, transformed, pounced on the protagonist, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground. The unexpected action left him baffled. As the situation rapidly escalated, the dragon sat on Lin with a flushed and playful expression, clearly taking control of the situation. A system notification appeared congratulating the protagonist for unlocking a new achievement. His stats increased significantly with an increase in his health, strength, and defense, indicating that the recent encounter had granted him considerable power. The Lin's hand, now showing increased power and sharper claws, gripped a wooden surface tightly, leaning confidently against a tree. Lin marveled at his transformation into a hero goblin, realizing that the dragon's blood had elevated him to a new level of power. He reflected on how the dragon had mockingly granted him that evolution, suspecting that she enjoyed watching his reactions. However, the Lin's confidence quickly faded when he saw the seductive figure of the dragon, approaching from behind her glowing eyes with a menacing intensity. She playfully threatened him, causing him to sweat nervously, realizing that perhaps he did not have as much control over the situation as he had thought. But he told her that she must fulfill her mission before returning to him. "Do your job first and then you can vent your fury on me," she ordered him simply. The dragon ran toward the goblins. Following Lin's instructions, he, for his part, took advantage of the distraction to escape the situation. The goblins, seeing the dragon approaching, were terrified and began to wonder what was happening when night fell. The goblins, happy and cheerful, gathered around the fire. One of them commented excitedly, "This is awesome. After drinking the dragon's blood, we've evolved." Another goblin confirmed it, "We can continue evolving. I feel stronger." Lin sat in a corner, he was reflecting. True, he thought, the dragon's legendary power manifests itself not only in me, but in these goblins as well. But the strength is still insufficient. Determined to improve the situation, Lin activated the main system and began searching for equipment. As he reviewed his options, he muttered to himself, "As leader of the heroic tribe, I can't afford to lose my reputation without relying on strength." With 180 points available, I had the ability to acquire some advanced items. His eyes rested on a hand crossbow capable of observing and firing elemental arrows of water, fire, thunder, or poison, perfect for short and long-range attacks, he thought. He also noticed a cheap knife, but with a ground rule that allowed attacking the sword saint and saving anyone in critical situations. Without hesitation he got both. Louder, still hanging from the log, stared in surprise at the crossbow in Lin's hands. The latter, with a mischievous smile, pointed towards him. "I don't know how this advanced weapon works," Lin said. "But I really want to try it on someone, and you, Louder, are right in front of me." Hearing this, Louder was filled with terror and asked, desperate, "What do you plan to do with me?" That's how Louder became the first to discover Lin's true power. In the magic forest, a group of scouts were searching the area. They tried to attract the monsters with sounds to make them run towards them. Among the group, a girl commented disdainfully, "These low-level monsters do not generate any interest. I don't understand what's so exciting about this mission." She preferred to follow the Sword Saint and was more interested in protecting the city and killing the dragon. The boy who accompanied her responded, "The dragon mother has been bothering the city constantly and the Sword Saint does not have time to take care of the goblins. She has left us this meritorious opportunity and it is a good job that does not require much effort. So cheer up, let's not waste this opportunity that Loader has given us." Just then they felt a movement in the forest. When they contacted the captain, they informed him that something was happening. Everyone went on alert and suddenly a huge spider appeared in front of them, surrounding the area with its web. Before the creature could do anything, the team launched an attack. The girl fired an arrow that hit the spider's abdomen directly. To them, this creature was nothing more than a level 3 insect, so they didn't consider it worth too much concern. However, the captain, seeing that the spider did nothing, was surprised. What he was seeing wasn't what he'd expected. Suddenly, the half-spider, half-goblin creature turned towards them, revealing a strange appearance that left the team completely baffled. Is he a goblin or maybe a goblin hero? They wondered in whispers what was in front of them. He was a mutant goblin, half-creature, half-humanoid. The captain, seeing him, began to connect the pieces quickly. "It seems that we have found Leader Goblin," he thought excitedly. The possibility of taking credit for defeating Leader Goblin filled him with satisfaction. "Yes, we found him," he murmured with a wicked smile. Without wasting time, the captain announced, "The war has begun. This goblin is furious and we are going to finish him off. Archers, get ready." But one of the knights walking next to him intervened. "Captain, don't rush, this should be my moment. So far you have killed all the goblins we have found. Leave it to me to eliminate this goblin hero." The knight, who had already eliminated several goblins along the way, felt indescribable excitement at the opportunity to face a hero goblin, and for the first time they had spent hours searching the area, and although they came across many weak goblins, this encounter was different. They believed that by eliminating this mutant they would get all the recognition for ending Leader Goblin. Although without realizing it, they were making a serious mistake. This mutant was not the leader and his perception of power was below what they would really face if they met the real boss. The knight advanced bravely, and the captain said nothing to stop him. "If you want to take care of this, go ahead. We know it will be over quickly," he replied indifferently. The gentleman, full of confidence, shouted, "Leave it in my hands. Just watch how I finished it with a single blow with his weapon in hand." Infused it with his aura and launched it at full speed towards the cabinet and from the distance. The weapon flew quickly towards the target and everyone expected a lethal impact. However, what happened next blew us away. The hero Goblin reached out and caught the weapon in mid-flight with chilling ease. Everyone froze, unable to understand how something like this was possible. "How did he do it?" muttered one of the archers. Completely stunned, the hero Goblin, wasting no time, prepared to attack the knight with the weapon he had captured. The team, seeing the imminent threat, panicked. "Activate defenses quickly," they shouted as fear began to take hold of them. The confidence with which they had started the fight was now crumbling before their eyes. What they thought would be an easy victory was turning into a nightmare, and as the gobliner raised his weapon to return the attack, the reality of the power they faced began to sink into their minds. How they had underestimated their opponent so much. "Activate defenses quickly," they shouted as they tried to keep the shield standing. But the goblin's blow, loaded with tremendous force, struck the shield head-on, causing cracks in its surface. The captain, who had underestimated Goblin, began to feel afraid. He didn't expect this. No one, he thought, as they watched the shield crumble under the brute force of the goblin. "He is strong," shouted one of the girls on the team. "Don't get too close. Luckily, there is only one of these and my arrows are not made to cut only carrots." But before she could do anything, a hidden goblin attacked her by surprise, going through his abdomen with his hand. The girl fell unconscious to the ground, as more goblins emerged from the shadows, revealing that the team had been surrounded by goblin assassins. The situation quickly worsened. They were overwhelmed by the number of goblins attacking them from all directions. The captain tried to maintain formation by ordering them to surround the enemy. But it was too late. One by one, the team members were seriously injured and finally knocked unconscious. The goblins, now in full control, began to discuss what to do with their prisoners. One of the goblins, the one who was half spider, showed clear intentions to take advantage of the girls on the team at that time. However, another goblin stopped him, reminding him that the booty belonged to the tribe and that the chief had given clear orders. If they captured humans, they had to take them to camp. The frustrated goblin spider replied, "Because it's always like this, we've killed so many humans. Why I never have my own loot?" He was clearly upset by the boss's orders, and his frustration soon spread to the other goblins. "We are stronger now," declared the spider goblin. "We should keep the loot for ourselves." His words echoed among the other goblins, who began to show signs of rebellion. "You are right, brother," they said, increasingly excited at the idea of challenging the boss. "You're the strongest goblin, should we follow you?" The atmosphere among the goblins became chaotic, with many of them beginning to convince Goblin, who was trying to maintain control, that they should take the loot to the tribe. Although his mind was confused, it finally occurred to him. "First let's take all these humans to the tribe. Then we will see what to do." So the goblins, carrying the unconscious bodies of the team, marched towards their camp. As they arrived, the other goblins began to cheer. "The heroes are back," they shouted, while others exclaimed enthusiastically. "The hero species has captured many humans today." That day for the goblins was a great success. But what they didn't know was that, although they had won this battle, the real challenges were yet to come. Lean sat in his chair, calm but watchful, as the goblins began to stir around him. The elf mother stood near him, watching him with a seriousness that contrasted with the chaos unfolding before them. "Do you think you can control them?" she asked him gravely. On the other side, Gabuchin, the spider hero, threatening to devour the captain of the team that had captured. Lin looked at him carefully and stepped forward to stand in front of him. "Gabuchin," Lin said in a firm voice. "That man has important information, let him go." However, Gabuchin with a crooked smile and dark gaze replied, "If you want to take him, you will have to exchange your wives with me." The air became tense at once. Everyone shuddered at Gabuchin's words. But Lin did not lose his composure. He knew that Gabuchin was on the verge of rebellion and his response had to be measured. Gabuchin repeated calmly, "You know very well what you are saying, I am your leader." Gabuchin let out a mocking laugh there. Pointing to another goblin next to him, he said, "He is stronger than you and now we follow him. He will be our new leader." The goblin Gabuchin pointed to, known as Vomaniacs, stepped forward. He was big, imposing, and his eyes sparkled with the energy of someone who had transcended his level. Lin watched him carefully and with a faint smile said, "So you're his backbone. Gov Maniacs, I'll give you a chance," he continued. Read as his eyes flashed with a mixture of anticipation and defiance. "Catch Gobuchin and I'll let you go." But before Gub Maniacs could react, Gobuchin stepped forward furiously. "You won't listen to Lin. Gub Maniacs is our new boss. Today is the day we kill you, Lin, and he becomes the leader of the whole tribe." Gobuchin's voice echoed in the air. But in the blink of an eye, Gop Maniacs grabbed him by the head and began to press with enormous force. Gobuchin screamed desperately, "No, brother. Please leave me," but it was too late. With a chilling crack, Gop Maniacs crushed his skull, killing him instantly. Fear spread among the watching goblins. Gobuchin was to be the new leader, and now he was dead in the hands of those who were supposed to support him. Chaos seized the scene, but Gomaniacs ignored the screams of the others. Stepping steadily, he stood in front of Lin and spoke in his calmer but intentional voice. "After my improvement as a leader, I have begun to understand many things," he said as he adjusted his armor. "I'm very different from those arrogant ones. I respect you a lot, although I also believe in absolute power." Lin listened to him, measuring his every word. The air around them was tense. Gumaniac continued, "You became a leader by defeating the previous boss. Now I want to try it too." Lin, intrigued by Gumaniac's determination, activated his ability to examine his stats. What he saw surprised him. Gumaniac level 50. Son of an elf blessed by the gods, read his mind. Then his eyes widened as he saw the impressive number Force 1201. Dark and dangerous emotion began to grow inside Lin. "Now I see where he gets so much courage," he thought as a smile spread across his face. The aura of fire around his body began to grow, enveloping him in flames that reflected his enthusiasm. "I'm glad to see you grow up," Bob Maniac said. Lin's voice filled with emotion, "But tell me, do you really want to confront me?" Go Maniacs, while impressed, did not back down. He knew he was facing someone much stronger than he had imagined. But there was something more than fear in his eyes. There was pride and a determination that could not be ignored. The duel was about to begin in the heart of a dusty battlefield. The confrontation was about to begin. Lin, the hero of our story, came face to face with a group of rebellious goblins. These little beings, with their bright eyes and greenish skin, were determined to face him, but Lin, with a calm that defied the attention of the moment, issued a warning to them. "You have a chance to surrender or else none of you will be left alive." However, the goblins, convinced of their own strength, were thinking in a coup d'etat. Among them was one, a respected warrior who, although he admired Link, believed that true strength lay in dominating others. The goblins, thirsty for blood, shouted at the warrior known as Bob Maniac, encouraging him to show who the real boss was. "Kill him and our women will be ours," they said. Lin, smiling as he realized that few goblins were willing to follow him of their own free will. But before the fight began, he decided to give the warrior one last chance. "If you want to join me, come to my side now. Otherwise I will have no mercy." With this he summoned fire magic in his hands, lighting the air with flames dancing. From the ground the captain of the rescue team, who had fallen into a corner, was gaping. He never imagined the leader of the goblin tribe to be such an unusual fellow. He had come here with the idea of escaping, and now he was stunned by the magnitude of the confrontation. The power disparity between Line and Gub Maniac seemed abysmal, and as the two prepared to fight, the captain began to think about how he could take advantage of the situation and flee when the former leader fell. Meanwhile, the goblins began to switch sides following the line in an unexpected turn of events. Lean confidently addressed Gub Maniac. "I seem to have more followers than you, but Gub Maniac, with fierce determination, raised his sword and declared, 'No, I seek power.' And so the battle began. Lin dodged his opponent's every attack with agility, leaving the captain even more surprised. Warrior Goblin looked stronger than the one she'd encountered in the woods. But Lin wasn't intimidated. When Go Maniac launched another attack, Link took a step back, pulled out a crossbow and fired. "You're good, but now let's see how you dodge this trick," he told him as the projectile flew towards him. The hero Goblin, having never seen such a weapon before, was stunned by the speed of the projectile and the chaos of the confrontation was about to unleash. The battle was becoming intense and everyone's fate was about to change. Lin Tianxian grew as the goblins watched fearfully. Others anxious to see who would prevail, be the hero Lionel everyone needed or Bob Maniac would prove that true strength lies in dominance. The flames of magic lit up the battlefield and the fight for survival was about to begin. Lin Tianxian on the battlefield was reaching unsustainable levels. The hero Goblin, determined not to be defeated by Lin's magic, unleashed a ferocious attack with his sword. With a nimble movement, he sliced the fireball in two, causing it to explode in a cloud of sparks. Lin, surprised by the strength of his opponent, braced himself for the next move. As the goblin lunged at him with all its energy, the earth shook with the impact of the sword and everyone present held their breath as the devastating attack headed for the Lin. The explosion echoed and a cloud of dust covered the field. However, when the dust cleared, everyone was stunned to see Link with the goblin's sword trapped firmly in his hands. "Wow, you did a good job impressing me, Goblin, but unfortunately I'm on your side," Link commented with a calm smile. Before the hero Goblin could react, Link counterattacked with his crossbow, the projectile hurtling through the air like a bolt of lightning, leaving his speaker on his knees. "You want to keep fighting?" Link asked, with a mixture of respect and defiance. The goblin, overwhelmed and defeated, could only answer, "No. I don't want to continue." His voice was full of resignation, as if the struggle for power had left him more than physical marks. Link, perplexed by Goblin's sudden humility, looked at the other goblins who, terrified, were on their knees on the ground. "Please don't kill us. Boss, we don't want to die. We promise not to challenge you again, we beg you," they implored in trembling voices. Lin, feeling a little less than a tyrant, thought to himself, what kind of thornless trash are these? With a mixture of disdain and compassion, Link urged Gub Maniac as he stood up. "Get on your feet, warrior." Just then, Kasana approached to heal Gub Maniac's wounds. While the goblin recovered, Link told him, "You have guts as long as you remain loyal. I won't kill you." Gub Maniac asked in amazement, "Really?" Lin confirmed, but then his gaze turned to the other goblins. "I can't let these get away though. Gov, kill them all." Recovering, Gov stood up and with a determined look turned to the other goblins. "I will kill them all if the boss orders." "Thank you for letting me live," he proclaimed. As he approached the fearful goblins, they begged for their lives, but Gov showed no mercy. One by one they began to execute their sentence as the echo of their cries echoed in the air. Lin, watching the scene, decided to take the situation one step further and devours the children of these rebellious goblins. "This will make you stronger." Hearing the order, Lin's followers began to cheer. "Long live the boss, our loyal boss." The atmosphere became intense, a jumble of fear and power. The captain of the rescue team, still tied up and watching the carnage from the ground, couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. He looked at Louder, who was pinned to a log, and asked in a trembling voice, "What the hell is going on here?" Louder's gaze reflected a mixture of terror and wonder as they both witnessed the birth of a new order on this chaotic battlefield. The atmosphere grew tense as Lin approached Louder, smiling with a mixture of contempt and amusement. "Lord Louder, what kind of creature have you awakened? He is not a simple mutant, but a monster that even the entire empire fears," he said, enjoying the bewilderment on the noble Louder's face. With the fury of a cornered man, said, "This is all the fault of that stinking swordmaster. She hides in the city like a turtle, sending only debris to rescue us." His voice sounded desperate, every word spiteful. "She doesn't realize that all the rescue teams she sent are useless." The captain of the rescue team, still tied to the ground, interjected indignantly, "I underestimated your abilities. But don't feel too proud. Once the Saint of the Sword is done with that golden dragon mother, she will come here with us royal knights to finish you off." Lin approached the captain, bowing slightly, as if intrigued. "Do you really think the Dragon Clan decided to go and harass the city of Guaman on their own?" The captain, caught in his thoughts, felt a pang of relief at the Lin's words. Everything was going according to the plan he had devised with Mother Dragon. "Wait. You mean the Knights of Guiman are being manipulated by you?" I asked incredulously. Lin felt herself enjoying the revelation. The captain, with his pride wounded, made his last request. "I only ask you to kill the scholar and not humiliate him. You have already obtained the information you needed. Please do me this favor without hesitation." Lin accepted his request, ready to end the games he had started. Meanwhile, in a distant place, the swordmaster Alice woke up from her dream. The deafening cries of someone calling her roused her from her lethargy. "Why are you so nervous? We just pushed the flying dragon and the knights came back." didn't we?" she asked while dazed. The gentleman who accompanied her did not know what to answer, and she anxiously insisted that what happened. Finally, the knight responded seriously. "The silver-blooded knights have been annihilated. Only one has returned." Alice was shocked. Surprise filled her face as she heard the devastating news. She never imagined that the situation would become so critical that only one survivor remained. Her mind raced trying to understand how it had all gone so wrong. The sacred sword was in a state of shock. The news had come like a dagger to the heart. The knight team of the Hilbert Glades, the bravest warriors in the realm, had been completely annihilated. There was only one survivor and his condition was critical. Without wasting a second, she changed her clothes and hurried to the temple, where the nuns were waiting for her with gloomy faces. The atmosphere was dense, full of uncertainty and pain. "Where is he?" she asked in a firm voice, though her eyes betrayed her distress. The nuns led her into a dark, silent room. On the bed lay the only survivor, a knight whose body was so badly wounded that even the healing potions seemed to have lost their magic. The warrior was on the verge of death, and every breath was a titanic effort. The sacred sword approached with slow steps, but its gaze was cold, almost icy. Her suppressed rage emanated from her being, and every fiber of her body demanded revenge for the loss of the Hilberblades. Despite the pain in her chest, she stood firm. "What happened?" she asked the gentleman, her voice as sharp as a blade of steel. The gentleman opened his eyes just as his voice trembled and broken with pain. "Gee, go," Goblin whispered barely audibly. His breath as fragile as a breeze. "In winter they were too strong. We couldn't turn our level." Each word seemed to take him forever. The sacred sword clenched her fists trying to stay calm. But fury boiled inside her, goblins with hero skills. It was inconceivable. But the fear and despair in the knight's eyes were real. "Please save the others," the knight pleaded, his voice trailing. "No, we couldn't resist." His life faded away as he tried to convey his final warning. "Stop, careful, these goblins are not like the others." And so, with one last exhalation, the knight died. The room fell into an uncomfortable, heavy silence, as if death itself were in the air. The nuns prayed while the knights accompanying the sacred sword turned in their place. Disbelief reigned. One of them, filled with anger, clenched their fists until their knuckles turned white. "Goblins. Those filthy beings have finished off the Hilberblades," he growled contemptuously. "I will exterminate them all myself." The knight took a step towards the door, determined to avenge his companions. But before he could leave, the cutting voice of the sacred sword stopped him. "Stop," she said in a tone that did not allow for reply. The knight froze instantly. The sacred sword looked at him with its eyes, which were sharp as daggers. "We can't afford to leave the city defenseless. The dragons attack more often and we can't send more troops to their deaths without a plan. You don't understand. These goblins could be waiting for just that. For us to let our guard down and strike again." The gentleman hesitated, but his face showed a mixture of frustration and sadness. He knew she was right, but the desire for revenge blinded him. Seeing his obstinacy, the sacred sword lowered its tone, but not its authority. In her words, "We must protect the city. I will kill those goblins myself and the mother dragon when the time comes," said her voice full of determination. Just then another gentleman spoke. Her name was Lady Saint, and unlike the others, she was not willing to take orders without questioning them. "We must rescue the others now, while they may still be alive," her voice insisted, vibrating with genuine passion. But before the debate could escalate, a gentle hand rested on Lady Saint's shoulder. She was a sorceress who had remained silent until then. Her touch was gentle, but her gaze was deep and understanding. "We must be realistic," she said, her words full of compassion but also raw truth. "In this situation, most likely there will be no one left alive." Silence fell again in the room. The truth, though painful, was beginning to settle. It was then that the door burst open and a man stepped in. His presence was imposing, and he soon made his opinion known. "There is no need to send reinforcements," he said in a cold and confident voice. The newcomer was Kazimov, the leader of the Death Knights. His figure radiated confidence, and his comment inflamed the tension in the room even more. "Why not?" replied one of the gentlemen in a defiant tone. Kasimov smiled smugly. as if everything was under his control. Arrogance is what destroyed the silver blades, he said with a disturbing calm. No wonder they fell. His pride sought him. I'll take care of rescuing the survivors and exterminating those goblins, if there are any left. The sacred sword looked at him suspiciously. She didn't understand how Kasimov could be so sure of himself after what had happened. And why do you think you can only face what they couldn't? She asked him suspiciously. Kasimov laughed softly. He slowly took off his hat and veil that covered his face. What he revealed left everyone silent. With a scar running down from his forehead to his neck. A battle mark that showed his experience and endurance. Because I've already fought 4 warrior titans alone and survived, he declared with a crooked smile. This will just be a ride for me. The sacred sword watched him closely, not yet fully trusting him, but knowing that Kasimov was as unpredictable as he was dangerous. The battle against the goblins and the threats that loomed over the kingdom were just beginning. And every step they took would have incalculable consequences. Kasimov, the self-proclaimed god of death, had made it clear that no one should worry. His strength, both physical and mental, was indisputable. With his unwavering confidence and a crooked smile, he left the room promising to return with good news. No one dared doubt his words. After all, who could challenge a man who had survived a fight with 4 titans? Yet as Asimov walked away with that unflappable arrogance, the sacred sword couldn't help but feel a pang of mistrust. Something didn't fit on the other side of the kingdom. In the heart of the Devil's Forest, things were very different. Lin Tian, leader of the goblins, had accomplished something few could have imagined. He had transformed his village into a paradise for his race. Under his leadership, the goblins had prospered and their growing power was beginning to be a real threat to humanity. As time passed, Lin Tian had managed to fine-tune its strategies, and now, thanks to the simulation system, he was ready to take another step. When he activated the system, he had only one goal in mind: to confront humanity. He wanted to take his goblins to a higher level, forge an alliance with the Dragon Mother, and create a heroic tribe that could defy any external threat. His plan included eliminating any rebellious subordinates and consolidating his power as king. With the loyalty of the goblins and the elves as subjective, anything seemed possible, but as they say, the calm precedes the storm. In the midst of their dreams of conquest, the peace of Lin Tian was interrupted by a surprise attack. Kasimov, sent by the sacred sword, had launched a night assault on the goblin tribe. Although Kasimov was eventually defeated, the damage was done. The tribe had suffered considerable losses, and that was not something Lin Tian was willing to tolerate. How could one man have caused such devastation? He wondered as he reviewed the simulation data. The system had been clear. This was a battle of life and death. And although he had managed to survive, Lin Tian knew that Kasimov was not someone to take lightly. The system offered him 3 options for the next move. 1. Relocate the tribe to avoid being married. 2. Prepare and wait for Kasimov's next attack. 3. Take the offensive and attack Kasimov before he could attack again. Lin Tian, who was not exactly known for his patience, quickly dismissed the idea of sitting and waiting for Kasimov to strike again if he wanted to minimize casualties. The best defense was a good attack. Without hesitation, he selected the 3rd option. Take the offensive. The system responded with a message that caused Lin Tian to stop for a moment. This is a life or death battle. Good luck. Along with this, he received 20 extra points for both his health and skill. The simulation was over, but the air of uncertainty still lingered. There was no clear outcome on who would be the winner in this confrontation. Lin Tian decided to leave nothing to chance. He knew Kasimov was powerful, but he needed more information before making any decisions. Your first objective: to investigate more about your opponent. That's when he turned to Louder, a trusted source of knowledge and madness. Hearing Kasimov's name, Louder could not contain his excitement. A maniacal laugh escaped his lips as his face lit up with an eerie glow. For him, Kasimov's appearance wasn't just a threat. It was an opportunity. Laughing, he warned Lin Tian that her death was near. Kasimov is a monster. Louder shouted with a mixture of joy and terror. That man has slain titans with his bare hands. Your days are numbered. Lin Tian heard him, and although inside, Louder's words resonated deeply. Titans, intrigued, asked for more details, and Louder, delighted to share the story, explained that titans were no ordinary creatures. They were monsters created by the enemy empire. Massive beasts genetically modified with Titan genes capable of destroying level 5 monsters with their bare hands. "It's going to end," Louder kept shouting. "They're all going to die. Kazamov's going to skin them alive." Although Louder's enthusiasm was unnerving, Lin Tian took the information seriously because he was undoubtedly someone with talent. He couldn't afford to be reckless. He knew it would be best to send scouts to assess Kazamov's strength before taking the next step. Meanwhile, Kazimov had begun his own journey to the Devil's Forest. The forest, normally full of dangers and creatures, looked desolate. Something was out of place, and that only increased his curiosity. It was not long before they reached the place where the heroic goblins and the knights had fought their last battle. The scene was a mess of blood and weapons strewn across the floor. "Pathetic," murmured Kazimov without a trace of sympathy. To him, those fallen knights were nothing but useless trash. He took a breath, enjoying the metallic scent of blood in the air. "Ah. The smell of death always puts me in a good mood," he said with a macabre smile. Moving a little further forward, something caught his attention. A cry for help echoed in the distance. Kazimov stopped dead, listening intently. Who was shouting? And why in a place as desolate as this?